Thank you very much for coming out in such large numbers and filling this hall. You have the distinct privilege of being subjected to a 4-hour presentation squeezed into 3 this evening. So, there's no time for digressing and for getting off the line, off the subject. I'm going to stick to the script, I'm going to stick to the slides, and I'm going to get through this, because if we don't, there will be large pieces of the puzzle missing. May I ask to turn the lights on a little bit, because I can't see your faces. If I can't see your faces, it feels like I'm talking to the ghost, to a black hole. It's a little bit better, a little bit more. If you could turn the lights up a little bit more. Thank you. No, that's the wrong way. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Okay, so let's get the show on the road. This is a body of information that's been growing and expanding for 25, 30 years. It's very difficult to remove things from this, because the moment I remove a section, you will know that there's something missing. So I really try to put together a linear and connect the dots for audiences to be able to follow without feeling that there are pieces missing. I've done my best. Let's do this. So we're going to connect the dots from the ancient past to the present to figure out why the world is so bloody screwed up today, and why most of us, and especially the young people today, find this world utterly, completely incomprehensible. They do not resonate with anything, what's going on. Most of us are confused about what's going on in politics. We don't understand why things are just getting worse and worse and worse, when the answers should be so bloody simple. And yet things are just getting more and more complicated. So clearly whatever is going on is going in the wrong direction. And that's why we have things like nostalgia, where we keep reminiscing about the good old days. Isn't that just that alone is a reminder that things used to be better in the past, because they're certainly not getting better into the future. So the concept of nostalgia is a reminder that we should wake up and do something about this future that we're hurtling towards. It's not looking pretty at this stage. But the good news is that there is a shining light at the end of this tunnel, which will end on the very high note tonight. So if you feel at any stage that this information is really dark and depressing, because it can get dark and depressing, I want to remind you that that's just the foundation for the information of what we can do as a species to get ourselves out of this mess. And I like to always work with the positive in mind, because if we don't, then there really is no purpose to this life as I see it today, personally. So, why does it matter that we connect the dots from the past? Because if we don't know who we are and where we come from, how could we possibly know where we are going? That's actually a quote from Jurassic Park, believe it or not. So, what I'd like to ask you tonight is to keep an open mind at all times, because the information, the further I go down this rabbit hole, the more disturbing it becomes. And I'm sure many of you are aware of this already. And there is no bottom to the rabbit hole. It just gets weirder and weirder and weirder. And some of the information I'm going to share with you tonight is getting to that point where I don't know if I can actually talk about some things in public at this stage. Some things I have to edit myself, because if I talk about some things in public, which I've tried, I come under incredible attacks. And I don't want to alienate any people. My whole purpose is to unite people, not to divide people anymore. We bloody divided enough. So let's share information that actually is going to act as a platform to unify people and give us a direction forward instead of create more division. So some level of editing is necessary from time to time to keep that unifying factor going. So let's kick this off. The world is covered in countless, unimaginable numbers of ancient, megalithic, ancient sites built by civilizations and people that we know nothing about. Every year, every month, every week, new sites are being discovered. And I know that Hugh Newman, for example, is one of those people that keeps discovering new, incredible sites. Some of the things he shared with me over the last few days just blew my mind. So we have no idea of what happened on this planet. We just literally are like babies waking up from a deep sleep trying to figure out who we are, where we come from, and why we're here, while there's this unwritten, unknown history of our planet that probably goes back a lot further and is a lot more weird and strange and unimaginable that most of us could possibly fathom. And it's these strange structures like this that were built by some people in ancient times. And when they were finished building this one, they decided to go from South America to just up the road here and build one of these. They said, let's drag a bunch of rocks from Wales and put them up in a circle. And somebody said, well, why should we do that? Because it's cool. And they did that. So they dragged a bunch of rocks, put them in a circle, and it looked cool, and they moved on. And they went into the desert, and they built a big statue because they didn't have any statues. And the reason I realized just recently why they could do all this stuff in ancient times, very simple reason. Because they did not have jobs. They didn't have jobs to go to every day. They had all this time on their hands to do stuff with. Say, what shall we do today? Hey, let's go and build some of these pyramidal kind of things right next to this big statue in the desert. So they went and they built big pyramidal stuff, and they went out somewhere out near Israel and then built these big platforms with giant rocks. And they went up the mountain in South America, and they built more rocks that fitted into each other. And they thought, wow, it'll freak out people in the future. And they went and built, carved big statues and put them under a roof of solid stone and rock, and because they needed statues and they needed some place to go and worship and offer food to these statues. And then they went up the mountain and they built wall faces with faces sticking out them. And why did they do that? Because it's going to freak people out. And they did that because they had all this time. And then they had a board meeting under a tree like people in ancient times did, like they still do in Africa, because they didn't have jobs. They had just this time, and they had a board meeting under a tree. And one of the guys said, look, what we've never done yet is dig a hole and surround the hole with giant stones. So they said, well, let's do that. So they did that. Why should we do it? Because we can. So they did that. And then one said, wow, that's amazing, huh? I said, what did I just hear you say? Did you say, huh? I said, wow, I think that is a really cool letter for an alphabet. We don't have an alphabet yet, but I think let's start with her as a first letter of the alphabet. So they went up the mountain and they carved a whole lot of hers, and they left them behind to confuse us. And then one of them said, you know what we've never done? We've never carved a whole city out of solid rock. So they went up the mountain and carved a whole city out of solid rock. Then they said, we need more pillars on top of a platform. So they built more pillars on a platform. Somebody said, we need more stairs with pillars. So they built more stairs with pillars. And then what is clearly evidential is that these people could hold their breath for a long, long time, because then they went under the water, under the oceans, and they did this only because they could hold their breath. Otherwise, they could never do this. Then they went into the jungles and they built these kind of things. They're really scary. And they built more statues and chopped their heads off because that was freaky. And then another guy said, what we've never done is taken a big rock and hollow the rock out. So they went and they hollowed a bunch of rocks out. And they scattered them throughout Siberia, and then they went back into the desert and they carved out big blocks and put them on top of each other like Lego blocks, and they covered it with sand because they thought it would be fun, just cover it with sand. And then they built this big thing that when you look at it from the top, it vibrates, it looks like it's moving and vibrating, and then they put these bell-like things on top of it to do something, and we don't quite know what it was. And the amazing thing is that they did all this stuff with hammers, chisels, ropes, and pulleys. And this is what our historians are still trying to convince us of today. That is the most remarkable and unbelievable thing. Even the next most unbelievable thing is that pretty much everything I shared with you here so far, all of these structures are either in the northern hemisphere or along the equator. Very little has ever happened in the southern hemisphere. And that's a big problem until you discover the vanished civilizations of southern Africa. Because if southern Africa is supposed to be this cradle of humankind that we keep being told about, there must be stuff that happened there in ancient times. And that's exactly what it is. The vanished civilizations of southern Africa is a big, big deal. I've only recently started to realize what a big deal it is, because until I started talking about this and showing this on the large scale in the numbers that we find these ancient ruins in southern Africa, there was very little knowledge or information written or or available about that. So welcome to my part of the world and my life, to the stone circles and the vanished civilizations of Southern Africa that left behind more than 10 million circular stone ruins that are absolutely spectacular only when you start looking at them from the air. Each one is completely unique, and some of them are very large, some of them are small, some of them look insignificant, some of them look like beautiful flowers, and you'll notice that they're all connected to each other by these channels. They do not stand alone. You'll notice that they have extended structures that are covered by soil that move away from the stone circles as we see them sticking out of the ground today. And it just goes on and on. What you're looking at is the largest cluster of stone ruins found anywhere in the world today. It makes everything else pale into insignificance. Sometimes they run for 100 by 100 kilometers, connected, all stone circles that are not standalone. They're all connected by channels and this weird spider's web effect that holds all of these circles and the channels together. And you just see the devastation and the destruction from some event that destroyed all of this a long, long time ago. And then a few of them have been rebuilt and restructured in more recent times. The key thing here is that there are no doors and entrances. So these cannot be dwellings for people or cows or other animals, because clearly they were not built with doors and entrances. They're something else. Archaeological drawings from 1939 clearly indicate that they have no doors and entrances, that they're circular structures all connected to each other by these channels looking like a bunch of grapes here in this image. And sometimes these circles are concentric, connected to each other, all linking to each other. And that is all seated in a large network of agricultural terraces that cover at least 450,000 square kilometers in South Africa and Zimbabwe. Who built these terraces? What were they for? What were they growing? And who were they feeding? In the most recent research that I've found from Anton Parks, if you've not come across Anton Parks yet, I highly recommend that you get his books. They're now available in English. It is a whole new spin and a whole new level on Anunnaki activity. And not just Anunnaki, but many other ancient beings that were not necessarily as benevolent as the Anunnaki. A whole new look at the Sumerian language as a prototype language to pretty much every language in the world today. And in there he suggests that whatever was happening in Southern Africa, they were growing huge amounts of food that were from there, they were feeding all the other groups of beings around the world from one central food growing area. And I'm suspecting that this is maybe this is why there are so many agricultural terraces, because they were feeding the beings, whether they were Anunnaki or other beings from around the world, from Southern Africa. And these terraces cover entire mountains. Once you start walking around, people that have been on my Stone Circle research journeys with me now, we've just had the second one, you realize the extent of this. It literally makes your jaw just drop down with wonder and amazement how vast this is. The flagship among all these ruins in Southern Africa unquestionably is become known as Adam's Calendar. This site was rediscovered by Johann Heine in 2003, 2004. It is now, as far as I know, the oldest example, or an example of the oldest working sun calendar. It still works. As you can see, the shadow of the rock closest to us casts a shadow on the calendar stone, and it moves from the left to the right, from the summer solstice to the winter solstice, and when it reaches the right edge of that calendar stone, it comes back. So you can still tell every day of the year based on the setting of that sun and the shadow, where the shadow lands. Credo Mutwa's famous Zulu shaman started to weep when I showed him the book, Adam's Calendar, in 2008. He said he never thought he'd see that special place again, because he was initiated there in 1937. He then proceeded to tell me what a sacred and important place it was in all of human history. And he said it was known as Inzalo Yilanga, or birthplace of the sun, in Zulu shamanic tradition, where humanity was created by the gods to be the slaves in the gold mines. So this is information that's well recorded, well knowledge handed down for thousands of years among African shamans, as always, completely ignored by mainstream academia and historians. This is the aerial photograph of Adam's Calendar, or Inzalo Yelanga, right on the edge of the cliff there. It drops down about 300 meters there and then goes into the Barberton Valley, which is an entire kilometer below this mountaintop. There's a 3D reconstruction of Adam's Calendar where we have a Horus stone. We have 3 stones, the Orion stones that line up with the rise of Orion. North is on the left, south is on the right. And here we have another stone over here that was removed in 1992 and put somewhere else with a plaque on it to commemorate the opening of the Blue Swallow Nature Reserve. Now, if you go from the southern stone on the right between the 2 calendar stones, as you can see there, those are the calendar stones. Oh, I think I have a pointer here, actually. Yes, to use technology there. That's the south-north line. That is south, that is north, and it goes right between the 2 calendar stones. If you continue north to your left, you get to Great Zimbabwe, and if you carry on further north, another 7,000 kilometers, you get to the Great Pyramid of Giza, all perfectly aligned on the 31 degrees east longitudinal line, otherwise known as the Nilotic Meridian. That is also where Linda Tucker has her white lions, the sacred white lions at Timbavati, also sits on the Nilotic Meridian. And then we get to the strange and mysterious tools, stone tools and artifacts that I started collecting. For some reason, when I first arrived here in this place from Johannesburg 11 years ago now, I don't know why I was attracted to certain things, because they didn't make any sense geologically or archaeologically, but I started collecting these weird stones, and thank God for that, because right now those are turning out to be the most valuable and crucial pieces of evidence for this vanished civilization and what was going on there. You can see how happy I was when I picked up that one. And then we have what I call these the bird-shaped stones. Here's another bird-shaped stone. It looks like it was carved, and then the patina has grown over it. And then the weird cone-shaped tools that I started collecting. Just strange cone-shaped tools everywhere, scattered across the mountains. Not to forget the donut stones or the Taurus stones. And there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of these donut Taurus-shaped stones scattered throughout southern Africa. And that brings us to the stones that ring like bells, these weird elongated stones that look like French loaves, that when you tap them, they ring so spectacularly, so beautifully, you would not believe it's a stone, it's a bell. The one at the top here, for example, that clearly looks like it was carved or shaped by somebody. That doesn't look like a normal stone, and neither does the one at the bottom. And they both ring at the same frequency. That is the key thing here. When you ring them, and they ring like bells. In fact, that one at the top was the very first tool that I've ever collected. But nothing could have prepared me for the discovery of January 2018, when my first Stone Circle research team accidentally discovered the mud fossils of giants and other creatures. And it was like cognitive dissonance have just suddenly vanished. So once I was blind, now I could see. It's incredible. And we were walking up the mountain with this team. This was in January. And this stone here, that stone there was lying right beneath my feet. So I picked it up, and once again, I just shook my head and I went, why are these stones these weird shapes? What's going on with all these weird shapes, man? And I put the stone down on the wall, one of the walls, and I walked up the mountain, and I said, by the time I come down, I'm going to figure out what this is. And I did. As I was coming down, I suddenly started remembering all the stuff I was seeing in my research into mud fossils. And when I looked at that stone again, I picked it up, I went, oh my goodness, this is a rib. And everything changed. And there you can see a collection of many of the fossils. Here we have a shoulder blade. We got one rib here. There's another beautiful elongated rib. And there are just all kinds of body parts that completely and utterly metamorphosize. Now, Here is one of the best examples. There's a heart. You can clearly see the aorta, where the aorta goes at the top. You see the coronary artery crossing the heart. This is about 3 times the size of a human heart. So this could possibly fit the shape of an Anunnaki. If the Anunnaki were 3 times the size or twice the size of humans, that could be an Anunnaki heart. Completely fossilized, metamorphosized into Hornfels rock. This is a huge problem for geology and metallurgy and chemistry. It seems that when these body parts get trapped in mud and water, they completely and utterly transmutate and transform from whatever organ it was or body part with the internal structure. It completely metamorphosizes into very dense crystalline rock called hornfels in geological terms. When these fossils break and you look at the internal structure, you can't see internal structure. This is the mystery. Only when you look carefully, you start seeing some indications of weird things going on. And you'll see what I mean in a second. But just to the untrained eye, when any of these fossils break, it just looks like black rock, known as hornfels or ringstone. We have teeth, hearts, ribs, and I'm picking up more and more hearts, different shapes and sizes of hearts. In fact, some of them look like they still have organic material in it. By the way, we have identified a few of these fossils and taken them away to the lab to extract DNA. Yes, you can extract DNA from mud fossils. That is not something new. It has been done before. So I wait with great anticipation for us to extract DNA from some of these fossils, because that's going to be a whole nother step. And one of the things that happened, I was holding that heart in my hand like I was here in this picture. Literally, it was taken on the same day. I was standing with his heart in my hand, and this couple pulled up, a guy and his wife, and he ran up and he said, "Hey, Michael, how's it going? I've been watching your videos." And he looked at me and said, "Is that a heart you're holding?" And I go, "Yeah, well, I think it's a heart." He goes, "Well, it is a heart. I'm a surgeon. That's a bloody heart." And I go, "Wow, you're a surgeon?" "Yeah, I'm a surgeon at the Johannesburg Gen." So I said, "Wow, hey, would you mind just going on video and telling me a bit about some of these body parts?" So I've got about a 5-minute video or more, but like 10-minute video clip of him going around telling me what these different body parts are. So it was a really beautifully timed moment. And since then, there have been many doctors and physicians and people that understand human anatomy, and their jaws literally fall to the ground when they see what fills the museum. That is where the shoulder blade was lying. I've been driving past this for 10 years. 10 years. Didn't see it. That's that expression. Once I was blind, but now I can see. Everything changes. Here's a bone knuckle, a large bone knuckle. The shaft going to the left, and you can see with my feet next to it, the size of that. I mean, and this is like a foot in a shoe or something. It's like some sort of a foot in a leather shoe. I was joking about this. Emma and I were up the mountain. We were joking. Look, this looks just like a foot. This is 6 months before we realized that we're actually dealing with mud fossils. Suddenly, everything changes. Now we go, okay, well, what's going on here? Here we've got bones. You can clearly see that that's a bone up there. That's not a rock, a fossilized bone. And all these others. This is a bone with muscle attached to it. So that's what these rocks look like. That's when the whole muscle and tissue together fossilize. That's what happens. They create these beautiful rounded structures. Here you got pieces of a spine. There's that rib that I picked up. More ribs. The fascinating thing about this rib here, that seems to be the one right at the top, except like 3 or 4 times the size of a human rib. When you look at it from the edge, it looks like someone cut it with a knife. It was like somebody was having a spare rib feast. It's ridiculous. Here's a part of a jawbone, this piece that goes up right under your ear here, except that's like 20 times the size of a human. Not sure what this is, what part of the body that is. This is another look at that bone and a claw. This is a claw from some creature. Have no idea, but we're now picking up more and more claws and hooves of creatures. This is a hoof of some creature. This is where the bone would have come in from the top. You can see it's got cutting marks, as if somebody actually cut the bone. There's like the talon on the side here. You can see where the talon broke off, or the, what's that thing? The talon? Was it called a talon? a claw, the claw, the talon on the chicken foot. Here's another angle from the top. You can see the saw marks. Somebody was sawing that bone off. And the phalluses. Here's a giant phallus. This is just insane. This was taken out near Adam's calendar. And then this is just a collection, a shot of a bunch of skin, sort of reptilian skin with the meat attached to it. This is a close-up of the reptilian skin on one of them. And this is my favorite one, where you can actually see the skin at the top and how the epithelial cells are growing up into the skin before they actually reach the top. This entire thing is one piece of Hornfels rock, completely and utterly metamorphosized. You cannot distinguish internal organs in any possible way. That is a huge cognitive dissonance problem we're going to have to come across, because we don't understand how that works. I don't know what the hell this is, but I find it fascinating. Again, you can see the skin, the reptilian skin, and whatever this was inside here that completely turned to rock. This is one of my favorite pieces. Again, the skin there, and then these claw marks or teeth marks. Somebody was having a little steak when a giant wall of mud came and engulfed them all and turned them into mud fossils. And then recently, on the last Stone Circle expedition, I've been walking past this rock and many rocks like this lying up on top of the mountain, and you just think they're rocks. Well, you'd be wrong. All of them are pretty much fossils. We notice this strange thing in there, this weird, like a, whatever that is, whatever you call it, a pattern in there. And we photographed it, and we started playing with it, the exposure. We realized it's a tail, you see, sort of a lizard or a crocodile tail with a hind leg, one hind leg there, another hind leg down here. When you look at the other, there's another view of it. There's a crocodile or lizard leg, tail going back there. There's the one leg. This entire thing is one giant rock. So, the mud fossils of giants and weird creatures have suddenly taken the spotlight off the stone circles and the vanished civilizations, because they seem to be everywhere. And we now have to put this into context of what we're dealing with here. We've got this vast civilization with all these terraces everywhere, growing huge amounts of food, millions of stone circles, and now this on top of it. What the hell is going on? And that brings us to the whole biblical story. When the gods were on earth, there were giants. And Hugh Newman knows all about this because of his new book about giants on record. We've all seen this. Many of us would have seen this image on the internet of real, actual historic finds of giants or pieces of giants or fragments. So these are real. And yet this is nothing compared to what we're finding. In the Jewish Encyclopedia, we get told about the rabbinical tradition, about the Anakim that are of the same titanic races as the Rephaim, the Nephilim, the Gibborim, the Zamzumim, and the Emim. They talk about them like they were the Russians, the Jews, the Russians, the Polish, the Portuguese, and the Italians, right? And like they knew who they were. Well, we have no idea who they were. The Zamzumim and the Emim, wow. In South Africa, we have the Boskop skull that's about 20% larger than the human skull. And then we have this bone fragment that's actually crystallized already at the Wits Museum, Wits University in Johannesburg. That's where I graduated from, by the way, in 1983. And there's the size. It's about at least twice this. It's at least twice the size of a human leg bone, a human joint there. Look at that compared to that. When you see it in real life, it's a lot more impressive. And then you start seeing footprints like this that has become far more interesting, but nothing like the giant footprint close to my house, about 2 hours drive from where I live, and this is probably about 7 times as large as a human. It's interesting that Klaus Donner actually found the nose bone, the heel bone, and a skull fragment in Ecuador of a giant that was about 10 meters tall, or between 7 and 10 meters tall. And what is even more interesting, that the skeleton of that giant in Ecuador is actually in the Ecuador Museum. It's on display for everyone to see. And then there's still people that talk about, oh, giants are just a myth, they don't really exist. And there are these giant skeletons for us to see all over the world. But these were the small guys. Once we start looking at the books of Leviticus and the book of Enoch, everything changes. Because in Leviticus, they tell us, or whoever the narrator is tells us, that we were like locusts by their side. That's how small we were compared to the giants that lived in that part of the world. And the book of Enoch, I've heard about the book of Enoch so much and about the giants, so I looked it up just before I left. And I found it, I think it was on page 69 or 89, I can't remember now, where it clearly talks about the giants that were 3,000 ells tall. So I looked up what an ell is, and an ell is just short of half a meter. So 3,000 ells would make these giants 1.5 kilometers tall, or just short of a mile. Now this is a whole nother scale. And we have to start cognitively and consciously thinking about the possibility and probability and reality of these beings that existed on our planet at some time in the past. Stop shoving it aside and ignoring it, because history and oral tradition keeps talking about it. And even now in the stone circles, you can't get away from it. Suddenly it's all about the bloody giants. I didn't want to talk about the giants, but I'm forced to talk about the giants. I want to talk about stone circles. And we're picking up pieces of bloody giants everywhere. These are not stones. These are fossils, people. Stones don't make these weird shapes. Body parts, anatomy makes these weird shapes, and not just of humans, of weird creatures that we have no idea what they look like. We don't know how many hearts they had. We don't know if they had blood. We don't know if they were cold-blooded or hot-blooded, if they had exoskeletons or inner skeletons. We're just speculating. We're just finding these parts, trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Just to remind you again of that knuckle, which is quite large, but nothing compared to this one. Look at this. This is the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. That's where the shaft came out and was cut off. Would have gone out to the right here. And in fact, from this angle, I've just noticed, I think yesterday when I was editing this, when you look at this angle, it looks like it's got that reptilian skin there on top as well. Stuff gets weirder and weirder. And this is just a close-up of where the shaft was cut off. You can see that the metamorphosized rock there is completely different because of the bone marrow and the blood and whatever was in that part of the bone when it was cut off. Whoever cut that off or broke it off or severed it off somehow. And then obviously we have the heart, the aorta. And if you think this is an interesting aorta and a heart, there you can see it going in there. And there's a coronary artery going down. Very clear. If there are any physicians here, you'll know what I mean. It's very obvious. How about this size for a heart? There's where the aorta goes in. That's probably about a, 50, 80, 100-ton heart. I have no idea. The fascinating thing, here's a close-up of the aorta, where that aorta, I suspect, would have gone in. And this is propped up right beneath a giant footprint. Like, here it is. It's propped up. It's not accidentally lying there. It's propped up with stones, holding it up. So somebody put it there to draw our attention to the giant footprint. And through some shamanic downloads and shamanic channeling, we've been told that the Anunnaki put this heart there to point to the giant footprint. And they also tell us that they were mining the remains of the giants for the gold in the remains of the bones of the giants. That has now got to do with monoatomic gold in our blood, monoatomic gold in our bodies, and when we die, that monoatomic gold becomes diatomic gold and it sinks to the bottom. So when these giants, and so even when we die, there's gold in our bodies, in our remains, but not much. But in these giants, there would have been quite a lot of gold, and it's all in a concentrated place, so it seems like they went and got the gold from these giants. It gets weirder and weirder. But the ruins weren't dwellings or houses, so what were the ruins for? We know from cymatic patterns what shapes of sound look like, and I think it's very obvious by now what the ruins were for. For those of you that have not seen this yet, to remind you what sound manifests, how sound manifests physical form. Every sound frequency has its very own specific shape. What you're looking at here is just a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional effect. So this is actually happening in 3D, moving away, creating these beautiful shapes and patterns. prime resonance frequency. That's what it's all about. Every frequency has a very specific shape or cymatic pattern. And as you can see, the higher the frequency, the more complex the shape. The lower the frequency, the larger the shape. I'm always amazed how many people have not yet seen this. You know, I assume by now that everybody must know this, but there are always a large number of people that have never seen this. And it just keeps going up and up and up. And just because you can't hear the frequency anymore doesn't mean it's going to stop. It keeps going above and below. And you'll see below in a little while how low it can actually go. How low we have detected cymatic patterns. Always beautiful. So, what the stone circles are just cymatic patterns representing the shape of the sound coming out of the ground at that specific place. That's it. So what these ancients knew, or the Anunnaki knew at this stage, I believe the Anunnaki were the ones that built all these, is they knew how to identify the shape of the sound frequency coming out at that specific place, and they placed the rocks on the shape of the cymatic pattern of the sound, in which case they basically amplified those sound frequencies. So they created an amplification structure. So cymatic patterns, that's why each stone circle is completely unique, none are ever the same, and this is why we started measuring very powerful frequencies in the gigahertz, sound frequencies coming out of the walls, and electromagnetic fields coming out of the walls, from 400 megahertz all the way up to 1800 megahertz at Adam's calendar. It is quite spectacular. Adam's calendar is a mystery, because the stone circles we can figure out, and we can understand how they amplify the sound frequencies because of the stones and the walls and the quartz. So it's the quartz in the rocks, in the stones, in the walls that do the vibration and the amplification. And the sound moves, and the moving sound then creates magnetic fields, and the moving magnetic fields create the electromagnetic fields. So, but Adam's calendar has got no walls. And yet it is infinitely more powerful than any of the stone circles. So something else is going on there. There's another mechanism at work there. And there we measured way beyond 375 gigahertz. The guy who was measuring it said he couldn't measure it any higher, but it indicates that it goes a lot higher than that. And then 1700 megahertz electromagnetic field running horizontally, and another one running vertically out of it. So we definitely have the indication of a toroidal field there. A toroidal vortex field that's being generated at Adam's calendar itself. And we have these weird flower-shaped ruins that actually are magnetrons, giant magnetrons built out of quartz. And I asked two magnetron scientists, how much energy would a magnetron 40 or 50 meters in diameter generate built out of pure quartz? And the answer was more than all the power plants on Earth today. So, whether that's accurate or not, I don't know. The point is we have thousands of these magnetron-type structures built out of quartz, all connected to each other into that giant grid, creating this huge energy grid of stone circles, magnetrons, generating insane amounts of energy, pulling it together and doing something. And that's the question. What were they using all that energy for? It couldn't have just been gold mining. I guess some of it was used for gold mining, but I'm now starting to think that they were possibly manipulating the weather, geoengineering, creating a climate, creating oxygen, putting more oxygen into the atmosphere, something like that, because this is such a gigantic initiative, such a gigantic scale infrastructure that they created. It had to be something to do, it had to have something to do with much more than just mining gold. And you'll see as we go into the magnetics and understanding magnetism and how these are connected to magnetic fields, how that could have also been used to possibly create oxygen out of sucking up water from the rivers, because many of the channels from the stone circles actually run and they end up in the river. They just run and end in the river. And this has puzzled me for years and years. But now I'm starting to figure out different aspects of this. In your mind, the more information you get, obviously, the more the different your conclusions are that you reach. So the stone circles are not the only ancient energy generating devices. It seems that to me that most ancient sites are actually energy generating devices, and we need to remind ourselves that they're made of stones, and especially the stone circles are made of stones that ring like bells. And these stones have high crystal content, and crystal content means quartz, quartzite, crystal, silica. This is all materials that conduct sound and conduct light. This is all the stuff that we use in the most advanced silicon-based technology today. And we also need to remind ourselves that digital data can be stored in crystals, in quartz crystals. But obviously that's not being used in the technology world today, because otherwise they just give the game away. Once we can start storing digital data in our crystals, then the whole, you don't have to go and buy the crappy storage devices anymore. Because you get one crystal and thank you for life. It's virtually infinite amount of information in there. So what we need to start doing is looking at stones as living, conscious entities, organisms. They store knowledge and information. They conduct sound and light. They have essence and consciousness imbued in them. Rocks are not just inanimate objects, and this is why ancient cultures and these guys in the ancient times used stone in its original form. They didn't have to extract the active ingredient to put it into a crappy little flashy box to sell it to somebody, because they didn't have money. They didn't do this as commercial entity or commercial enterprise. They were doing this to help themselves on a planet they were trying to make habitable for themselves. So they used rock in its original shape and for everything they needed to use it for. So all these ancient structures built from rock are just giant machines, and using the quartz and the crystal and the silica inside the way that it should be used, as resonators, energy-generating devices, using light and sound to activate it. And this is why most of these seem to be aligned to the solstices, equinoxes, movement of the sun, and often movement of the stars. So when the sun comes up over there, and the rays of this rising sun comes down a passage and hits a standing stone down a passage, the light and the sound of the frequency of that light hits the standing stone. It's like hitting enter on a computer. It activates the machine to start doing whatever that machine was constructed to do. And then the sun moves, and on another solstice over there, it comes down a different passage and the first morning light hits another standing stone, and that machine gets instructions to stop doing what it was doing and do something else. And possibly that's what happens with the movement of the stars as well. When they go down these weird shafts and etc., they activate the light and the sound frequencies of that light, of the starlight and the sunlight and possibly the moonlight, are the activators to switch on these ancient machines. So they built them without having to have human or intelligent intervention, just operated by the movement of the sun, the moon, or the stars. And we know that they're active because photographs like this tell us that they're still active. Obviously, we know this from the stone circles in South Africa. We've measured many of them. The sound frequencies are insane. Even Stonehenge, the beautiful concentric properties that have been measured in Stonehenge show us that it's strong acoustic properties that were created by intent, not by accident. And I believe, just like everything else, Stonehenge was a very powerful energy-generating device, a huge, powerful resonator, and much, much older than we can imagine. I was there with Hugh yesterday, and just to confirm what I saw in 2010 when I was there for the first time, and my jaw nearly dropped when I saw the big, tall stone that fell over. The two tall stones, one of them fell over and broke, and I was told over and over again, yes, that stone fell and broke. And I pointed out to the people, look, if that stone fell over and broke and is only a few thousand years old, then that break should be a reasonably clean break, a sharp edge. Well, that's not the case. That break on that stone has erosion that's about half a meter, about, a foot this way and a foot that way. Erosion, I'm sorry, but sarsen stone, a dolerite stone of that hardness, will not erode half a meter in a few thousand years. So either they're lying to us about those stones and that stone did not fall and break, or if it is that stone that fell and broke, that Stonehenge is more than 1 million years old. It's just a very old, mysterious place. The geology is not going to lie to us. Our historians will, our geologists will, our archaeologists will lie to us, but the geology is not lying to us. The erosion is there. You can't wish it away. So think about Stonehenge in a very different light. Next time you go there, check out the erosion on that stone. The ancient sites are just basically advanced technology on a gigantic scale. And we've never been able to see it because most of us don't really get images, or we don't see these ancient sites from the air, like the stone circles. When you stand next to it and you walk in these temples in Egypt, it's so overwhelming and so mesmerizing that we don't really see the wood for the trees. But when you start looking at it from the air, everything changes. And when I was there again in 2012, I realized that these obelisks are just like antennae. They ring like bells, like the stones in my museum I've been collecting. They're beautiful. They ring so perfectly. And when you look at these temples in Egypt, they're just too many pillars, not enough space. It's obviously not meant to come and kiss butt of some king or some god and offer food and come there for forgiveness and all. It's just, it's the wrong shape, the wrong size, too many pillars. Why? And when you start looking at it from the air, you realize what it's all about. It's not about worshiping and offering food and that. And you start seeing what's going on. And resonating, vibrating pillars on beautiful platforms, acoustic chambers. And very quickly you realize that these are just templates for gigantic circuit boards, gigantic energy circuit boards on a scale that we could not have imagined. And because they did this in times where money did not restrict what they were trying to achieve. They did what they had to do to either inhabit a planet or survive or create a result that they were looking for. Microprocessors become giant macroprocessors. And this is one of my favorite images. You can just imagine what historians are telling us about the kind of worshiping that used to go in these places here. Oh, yeah, no, those are major places of worship. Really? Yeah. And the pyramid is just a beautiful example of the same thing. It just carries on. And Angkor Wat, I mean, there you got the combination of quartz and water, the two most abundant elements on Earth, that both contain memory, conduct light and sound. Sacsay Huaman is another great example of just a circuit board on top of a mountain. This is not a mountaintop fortress, clearly built for other reasons, that was possibly inhabited in more recent times and used by more recent civilizations, just like the stone circles. That some of the most recent civilizations used it. They created doors and entrances so they could use it for themselves and for their cows or whatever, but not the original architects. That's not what it was built for. Borobudur, Indonesia, I mean, this is just ridiculous. Literally, if you see photographs from right above, it looks like it's alive. It's actually, the photograph looks like it moves when you look at it. And then, obviously, on top of it, it's a dead giveaway. These giant bells with these antennae going up into the sky, and it's always antenna going up into the sky. And it seems that it was human sound that actually held up this weird energy grid that was used to activate these circuit boards. Human sound, because you see these perfectly acoustic amphitheaters that are always connected to many of these circuit boards. The Parthenon in Egypt is also an old circuit board. There's your giant thing there, the resonating chamber there, and the rest of the circuit board has already been completely destroyed, and it's connected to the amphitheater here, and there's another smaller amphitheater there, and the amphitheaters are always connected to the circuit board. To activate it, you fill that with a bunch of people, you scare them, you get them excited, you make them make a noise, clap their hands, or sing, or fill them with fear, and that energy gets shoved into the circuit board. It activates the circuit board to whatever it's supposed to do. And we got some interesting stuff going on. Here's another example. There's your circuit board connected with a beautiful row of ringing pillars connected to the circuit board here, the amphitheater there. This is a very badly destroyed circuit board, as you can see. And there's another one, old remains of the circuit board up top, the top of the mountain. There's your amphitheater there that was connected to it. And there's another one here in North Africa, in Algeria. Here they put the they put the amphitheater right into the heart of the circuit board. It's really badly destroyed. And so it goes. And nothing has changed in 2018. Temples have just become churches, towers, steeples. Who came up with this idea of this giant cone sticking up into the sky? Who was the architect that came up with this? Why do churches and places of worship have to have this architecture? You know, it's because people create sound and energy. You understand how important the sound and energy is, and how these cones at the top of our churches and mosques actually send that sound and convert that sound into a different kind of sound as it sends it up into the sky. And so we start talking about the cone-shaped effects. Our sound is being harvested by cone-shaped roofs. And the business centers in our cities are nothing less than just giant things, resonators up into the sky, resonating the energy of the people and the noise and the phones and the anxiety and the fear. And our city grids are just like giant circuit boards, all connected by channels of energy, just like the stone circles connected by channels of energy that never stop making a noise. We never stop making a noise. Have you ever been out into the country where it's really quiet and you get back into a city? How noisy the cities are? It's insane, actually. It's quite nauseating. And that's when I realized that in the Matrix, when Morpheus holds up the battery and he says, we are the energy. And when I first saw the Matrix, I had no idea what he was talking about. I now have a much better idea what Morpheus was saying. What we energy for at this stage is open to interpretation. But what I do know, more than anything I've ever held dear, is that everything we've been taught is a lie. When I first came across the statement some 30 years ago, I thought, what an arrogant prick. Who wrote that? Really? How can you say that? I'm a smart guy. I've got a degree. I came out of university. I know what they taught me. I know a lot of stuff. And I was just blind. I was still sucking up all that stuff. Now, I have a pretty clear idea of everything I was told is just deception, and confusion, brainwashing, and it seems to me that the bigger the lie, the more we believe it. And that is something that I would like you to really contemplate, because we're now going to start talking about some lies that some people have a problem with. And it's small lies that we can get over the small lies. Oh yeah, of course they do this, of course. Oh no, but this is too big. Oh, too many people are going to have to be in on it. And that's what we constantly try and overcome the big lies by believing that it's impossible for them to pull the wool over our eyes, because millions of people would figure this out. Well, they're not figuring it out. And if they are figuring it out, they're just called conspiracy theorists. So, in all these areas, these are the areas that the lies have become so large that it really takes a lot of guts to start admitting it to ourselves. Because until we admit this to ourselves, we remain slaves of those that create these lies and weave these spells and keep us enslaved on every possible level, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, consciously, socially. We're enslaved in every possible way. Micheal Ledwith was an advisor to the popes for 17 years at the Vatican, and he uncovered one of the biggest lies. And I still cannot get over the fact that no other biblical scholar that I've come across has exposed this lie or this oversight. And they all should know this, because Micheal discovered that the opening phrase of the Bible does not say, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." That is a lie. The Hebrew Bible, from which this was translated, actually does not begin with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And all biblical scholars and these guys that do these translations know this, and they should know this. So they should have busted this centuries ago, right? And they did not. So either someone is paying them or telling them not to bust this or not to reveal this. And Micheal Ledwith discovers this because he realized that in the Hebrew Bible, it starts, opening phrase of the Bible starts with Ba, with the letter B, the second letter of the alphabet. Ba, Rashit, bara Elohim, et ha-shamayim wa et ha-iaretz, which is actually a grammatically nonsensical statement. And it refers to Elohim as a plural. And in this statement, it actually means the singular God, because that statement is translated as, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Well, that's not true. So when he inserted the first letter of the alphabet, which it should have, A or Aleph, it now says Abba, which means Father. So it's Abba Rashid bara Elohim et hashamayim wa et ha'aretz, which is the Father of the beginnings created the Elohim, the heavens and the earth. And that changes everything. And that brings me to the three holy cows of our education. Humans evolved out of apes. Nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, and energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be converted from one form to another. The theory of evolution remains a theory. There is no real absolute evidence that we evolved out of apes, but that gets shoved down our throats. And if you have not seen Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, please go and see that documentary. It's quite spectacular what they do to academics around the world just for mentioning the word creation or creative process. It's unbelievable. They destroy their lives. In the Middle Tennessee State University, 2005, a bunch of students propelled sound beyond the speed of light. This was published in the American Institute of Physics and then very, very quickly shelved because this is very dangerous information, especially for the youth. I'll explain to you how sound can travel beyond the speed of light because it's not the way we think about sound traveling in this medium. It's sound, and yet it is slightly, we need to first come to grips about the nature or with the nature of our reality, which I'm going to cover in this. So, and then finally we get told that we cannot create or destroy energy, and then in the next second they tell us we all come from the Big Bang. So, oh wow, that's cool. I thought we can't create or destroy energy, and now we suddenly come from the Big Bang. So you just see how they play, how they lie, and they constantly create these backdoor exits for when they get caught with a lie, and they have a backdoor exit. And in this case, they say, well, you see, that energy wasn't created out of nothing. It actually came from an infinitesimal small little point called a singularity. So they constantly make up these things, like the nucleus of an atom is impossible for the nucleus to exist because of the repulsive forces, because we can't figure out how the nucleus of the atom exists. So they come up with a BS thing for it. They say, well, it's the strong force. It's the strong force that holds the nucleus together. Oh, it's a strong force. Of course, that's how it works. So, well, we have no idea how it works. It shouldn't work. It shouldn't be there. But it's the strong force that holds it together. So the moment we give it a name, everybody goes, oh, that's great. Well, that's how it works. And that's how they bamboozle us. You see, theoretical maths and theoretical physics is the black magic of the new millennium. That's what it is. It's a really dangerous tool. And that's how they get away with a lot of this stuff. And that brings me to the space and cosmos, one of the greatest deceptions and one of my most passionate new areas of research is what is space and what is the cosmos? Because it seems to me that one of the greatest secrets that has been kept from us and yet given to us by NASA themselves for the last 3 or 4 decades, they constantly tell us that there's water everywhere in space. But that's not what we perceive, right? If I told you there's water in space everywhere, you'd say, well, you're an idiot. Space is a vacuum. We know space is a vacuum. There's nothing there. And yet that's not the case. And when you start researching space and water, it becomes mind-blowing. Article after article after article after press release and press release about water in space in amounts that are completely mind-blowing. Ocean worlds, water in the solar system and beyond. In 2009, NASA found a sprawling cloud of cold water vapor around a solar system at a nearby star. The water vapor could eventually deliver oceans to dry planets that are forming in the system. It's water vapor. It's not water in some weird thing. It's water vapor they're talking about here. Could eventually bring oceans to new planets forming. This is just a little disturbing. And just hold on to your faith. The famous Eye of God nebula actually weeping tears of water. Wow, so there's water coming out of this nebula. This is not just a solar system. This is a nebula. This is a place where galaxies are born. Stars and galaxies are born in a nebula. And water is coming out of this. Can you imagine the size of the water that's coming out of a nebula? It's like one drop of that will engulf our entire solar system. And it just goes on. Oceans detected inside Saturn's moon, and stars found shooting water bullets. NASA confirms best ever evidence water on Mars. Water from Orion. Now there's water coming out of the constellation of Orion. And this is a big one. Star found shooting water bullets. I mean, a star shooting water bullets. A star is supposed to be a sun. There's water on a star? I challenge you after this evening, go to the pub tomorrow, strike up a conversation with somebody and tell them, did you know that there's water on the sun? What do you think they're going to tell you? You're a freaking idiot. They don't have enough information. So we're getting to this point now that you can't have a discussion with somebody about any subject unless they have sufficient amount of information, because they'll constantly block you, tell you you're stupid, and so forth. So it's tricky, and we have to navigate this river of discussion and debate very gently and very carefully, because we're going to lose friends and families and break up partnerships because of new knowledge and information that some of us embrace and others discard as BS. So then they do a study, NASA, and they say basically all stars have water. This is the conclusion. I'm not going to read the fine print. You can do this yourself. All stars have water. That's the conclusion. And stellar sprinkler nourishes galactic garden. Wow, I didn't realize there was a garden out there in the cosmos. It's being watered by some stellar sprinkler. That's lovely. I'd love to see this garden. I wonder how big those plants are, dude. Man, wow. This is like bigger than the tree on Pandora. And then water on the sun. Stanford University tells us that there's water on the sun. And even better, a more appropriately named university, Waterloo University, tells us that there's water on the sun. And I'm going to leave this here because you need to go and do some of your own research here. It seems to me that the universe and the water are the same thing. On the left is one of those deep space images of the universe. On the right is a picture of a swimming pool. And I think you start seeing what's going on here. And the lies and the deceptions are getting bigger and bigger. Also keep in mind that many of the images that we get shown by NASA come from radio telescopes, not from optical telescopes that actually photograph an object. It's a radio telescope that brings radio signals, and then they convert those into beautiful images through NASA's artistic impression graphic designers, right? So these are often you don't see pictures. These are radio telescopes. Our very own solar system is completely surrounded by water. They tell us it's ice, but can we believe them? Is it ice or is it water? Like water vapor, like that other thing. I don't know, but we call it the Kuiper Belt. It's a belt in a disk that surrounds the outer perimeter of the disk of our own solar system. Our solar system is a disk. Keep that in mind. I'm going to come back to this. So there's the Kuiper Belt, this huge amount of ice, right? And that whole thing is now completely engulfed by more water called the Oort cloud that completely engulfs our entire solar system. It looks something like that. So suddenly, our own solar system is made up of water, surrounded by water, and yet there's supposed to be vacuum in space? How does this work? Where does that vacuum in the water, how does that break up? How does it work? Where does the water go? Where does the vacuum begin or end? And it's a little confusing for me. But we know that there's water in space because they keep telling us there's water in space. So suddenly the Bible makes a lot more sense to me, because I've always had a problem with one of those statements in the opening phrases of the Bible, when the Spirit of God moved over the waters. How can the Spirit of God move over the waters when nothing has been created yet? Surely water should be part of the creation. And I'm starting to see now why water is so sacred. Is it possible that water is so sacred because water is actually foundation of all creation, or is connected to all creation? Well, if you look at chemistry, it seems like it, because between oxygen and hydrogen, you've pretty much got the same elements in every other chemical reaction or chemical formula. Hydrogen and oxygen are part of pretty much everything. You cannot separate it. Hydrogen and oxygen make water. So it starts to get really interesting and compelling to think that water is actually made up of space. And God said, let there be light. So the Spirit of God is moving across the waters, and it's the sound of the Creator that makes the light. How does that work? Well, in modern science, it's known as sonoluminescence. When you put a sound frequency into a body of water, after a little while, a beautiful bubble appears filled with light. Sound in water, sonoluminescence. God said, let there be light. Is it possible that water is the stuff that holds the universe together? I'm beginning to believe that. I'm no longer believing the lies of NASA and their fake CGI images that they send us and give us. Sorry. In 2013, astronaut Luca Parmitano almost drowned on a spacewalk. How does an astronaut almost drown in a spacewalk? And they covered it up by putting out a press release. So they always have a back door. They always have a back door out. But if space is water, where does the watery space begin? Where is the edge? Well, if we start listening to what the Bible tells us in some ancient scriptures, maybe we should listen to all of it. It says, God placed the firmament in the sky to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters below. I have no idea what that means, but I'm starting to get an interesting picture. And then how did God create the flood? It tells us God opened the gates of heaven to let the water pour in on the earth. Okay, now I'm starting to see how you can create a flood. If space is water, it's starting to make more sense. And then suddenly, vacuum just becomes a myth and not a scientific fact. Because the simple basic physics of a vacuum in space just doesn't work. If there are any scientists that actually just think about this, or physicists, the whole thing of vacuum in space is just not compatible with any kind of physics formula or physics that we can put to it. Where does the vacuum begin? Vacuum is one of the most powerful forces of nature. Where does that vacuum begin? We often get confused between gravity-free and vacuum. They're not the same thing. Just because there's no gravity doesn't mean you're in a vacuum. And just because you're in a vacuum doesn't mean there's no gravity. The two are not the same thing. So don't get confused by vacuum and gravity-free. What you can't do in space or in a vacuum, what you can't do in infinite vacuum is you can't propel sound. You can't have explosions, fire, propulsion, jet engines, rockets, none of this stuff. Can't do that because there's nothing to propel against. And then these guys on YouTube that make these vacuum tubes, they go, oh, look, I created a vacuum tube in my garage. I'll show you that you can propel a rocket in a vacuum. I go, really? You've lost your brain. You're comparing a fishbowl in your garage to the infinite vacuum of space? You really lost your mind, dude. And then you start watching like SpaceX sending a rocket up into space, and the very well-trained presenter that's got all the buzzwords. She knows all the lingo and all the buzzwords. And at one stage I was watching and she says, and the rocket is about to enter the vacuum of space. Really? And millions of people are watching this and they believe this. You see, they just, the rocket just entered the vacuum of space. Where? How did it, where? Please frickin' explain that to me. In scientific terms, not in BS terms. Oh, you won't understand it. No, please try me. I want to understand this. Explain to me where that vacuum begins. And we start realizing that everything we've been told about the moon landing, space, is probably one of those big hoaxes. It is a tough one to swallow, but we're going to have to start swallowing it sooner than later. The longer they string us along, the worse this is going to get. So, for those of you that still believe that we landed on the moon, I'm going to shatter that for you right now. If you've not seen Jay Widener's Kubrick Odyssey, that's the first point of departure. Watch Jay Widener's Kubrick Odyssey, and you will never believe another word NASA tells you. You will never ever believe that we landed on the moon, and you'll understand Stanley Kubrick's role in this entire thing and why he eventually died when he pushed it a bit too far with eyes wide shut. But basically, everything you've ever seen from the moon, all the images or footage of the astronauts was shot by Stanley Kubrick in the early days. I'm not sure who shot the more latter part, possibly him as well. But the earliest moon landings and all that shot by Stanley Kubrick with his very, very specific style of cinematography. It's a dead giveaway, and that gave him basically the freedom to make whatever movies he wanted. He then made a movie called The Shining to tell us that he was the guy that shot the moon landings. And for some people that still think the moon is a real physical thing in the sky, that we landed on this physical object in the sky, the image of the moon that we see from Earth is part of the agenda. It's part of the particle physics agenda that I'm coming to make us believe of particles that make up everything in creation. And we need to reconsider what the moon is, because after you've seen the lunar wave, you'll never think of the moon the same way again. And this is what the lunar wave is. The first one was filmed in 2012, and it's this weird electronic glitch that goes across the moon every so often. It's been filmed hundreds of times now, not just by one person, but by many other photographers with very high definition lenses. And pay attention, because it's like the old computer and TV screens. You see this line, this electronic line, move across the moon. Follows the edges, the contours, and the line moves from bottom to top, from side, from left to right. It moves in all different directions. This has become known as the lunar wave, which gives us a very clear indication that the moon is not what we think it is, and it's most likely a hologram.
All right, welcome to the Crow Discovery Project. Again, this is the 2012 lunar wave footage, the best example of the lunar wave that we have, and I'm going to show you some things that sharp-eyed followers have spotted long, long ago, and that I have talked about, but I have never taken the time to carefully illustrate. And what I'm going to show you here means an awful lot, but I'm also going to show the pulses that happen in the lower left limb of the moon. So watch the lower left there, and I'm just going to run a straight slowed down view, 30%. If you've got sharp eyes, you'll see what we detected on a 60-inch monitor. Now look inside the circle. There's a pulse that goes from lower left to upper right, and in the next circle, the yellow one, there's a lateral sweep that goes from left to right straight across the screen. And this is all going on as the wave is starting at the bottom. So now look at the pulses backwards and forwards. That's backwards. This is forwards, coming from the lower left limb of the moon. You can see the pulses now that I've put filters on them, how they have a curved aspect to them. And if you've got sharp eyes, you'll see the sweep up above. Now what I'm going to show you now, we have talked about, and many sharp-eyed viewers have known that this was an important thing about this clip for a long time. Here comes the wave. Look at the dark underlined crater in the center of your screen. Watch how it's displaced, almost like you're looking through water. There goes the wave backwards, forwards, the wave hits the crater, displaces. This wave is displacing, as if you were looking through water, the entire image of the moon. Now I've never taken the time to animate this. I have talked about it. There it is zoomed in. Now this is running at 30%. And I'm going to zoom out. There goes the wave to the top, and there's going to be another wave coming in from the bottom. Now I'm going to run this at 30%, so as the wave comes in, you can choose any landmark you want. Here comes the wave from the bottom to the top. Choose any little landmark you can see there and watch it be displaced. Now that round-looking ring crater, forwards, backwards, backwards, and one more time forward, and I'll zoom out. And you can watch it go all the way to the top. Again, this is at 30% with quite a few filters like Find Edge and some other things, Invert.
Okay, I think you get the gist of that. This has been filmed many times now, not just by one person. So it seems to me that that we're not looking at anything physical, and that this hologram or whatever the hell that is possibly hiding something that's really behind it. And then the Mars landing, and when we first landed on Mars, I got so excited. I was just really excited about the Mars probe and all the pictures from Mars. Boy, it was like one of the happiest days of my life. So for me to come to terms and admit that this is probably a hoax is just really a tough pill to swallow. But unfortunately, we have to swallow these pills, because when you start researching the whole Mars landing and the experiments and the training they did in the Canadian Arctic on Devon Island, I suspect that pretty much everything and all the footage we've ever seen on Mars was actually just shot on Devon Island, very far northern Canada. And it's depressing, but that's what it is. And we've got to deal with it. Sound and resonance are the common links of creation. And this brings us back to sanity and back to centering ourselves and back to getting a glimpse of what's really going on in our lives, getting a closer feel of the nature of reality. And it's the common links of creation. We live in an electromagnetic universe. This is what we are told, where everything spins and vibrates, right? Except the moon, obviously. But everything else spins and vibrates, but not the moon. It's very special, because it's a bloody hologram. That's why it doesn't vibrate and spin. And the electromagnetic universe is actually a subtle deception. And you'll understand as we go why I say this. It's a very subtle deception, a very important subtle deception, because it's not the electromagnetic universe that we live in. It's the magneto-electric universe that we live in. And just twisting those two around would have given us a very different perception while we grow up about the world that we live in and the universe and this reality of us, if we don't think of it as the electromagnetic but the magneto-electric. Huge consciousness shift in growing up with that kind of thinking. Everything has its own specific frequency, as we mentioned before. Prime resonance frequency. Everything vibrates at its own frequency. That's how we can manipulate things with frequency and sound and resonance. All comes to the same thing when you start breaking it down. Sound and resonance are also the common links of all creation. In Christianity, we have the Word. We've been through that. We have the Om in Hinduism, the Egyptians that sang the universe into creation. And my favorite, the Aboriginals that believe the world was sung into creation with 3 sacred songs, or brought into creation with 3 sacred songs, which is the equivalent to the Holy Trinity. And we start seeing the whole important structure of music and resonance and chord structures, harmonic resonance in music. We get the 6 days of creation very obviously become visible in sacred geometry, and the 6 aspects of Om show us cymatic patterns, and the 6 aspects of the all-seeing eye of Horus show us 6 very obvious resonating ratios that tell us that all these ancient cultures understood sound, resonance, and frequency, and it's encoded in all the things that they did. Sound is the source of all creation, and it's all about coherence and harmonic resonance. Even in our bodies, if the cells of our body are not in coherent harmonic resonance, our cells are in disease, and that's why we get sick. And if we're not resonating with the earth frequencies, the natural earth frequencies of Gaia, we are in disease with the Mother Earth that we live on and walk on, and that's why we get sick. So everything in modern technology, in broadcasting, in industry, in the large corporations and military, all the stuff that is imposed on us is all there to create dissonance between us and our environment, to make us sick. And we need to be cognizant of this and conscious of this. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is everywhere around us. Everything that we touch that's been given to us by the big electronics companies causes dissonance and dis-ease that make us sick on levels that we can't even begin to imagine. From mind control to making us do things that we normally wouldn't do. Obviously, Hans Jenny's beautiful documentary called Cymatics in the 60s will show you exactly how sound is pretty much behind everything in creation. So please go and look at this on YouTube. It's available free of charge. We've already looked at sound manifesting in physical form. This is the quickest and easiest way for us to comprehend, once again, how this untouchable, invisible thing called sound can manifest in physical form. That little thing on the metal plate, with the sand on the metal plate on that video. That's just probably the quickest way for us to say, okay, sound can manifest physical shapes. Okay, I get it. I've seen it on the metal plate. And sound also inspired religious symbols, because the guys that created the religious symbols know all this stuff. Remember, religious movements were created to create division among humanity. So these guys knew all this stuff, and they know, they're all connected to the ancient bloodlines. They will talk about and everything else that they did, and how they've been manipulating humanity in every possible way. So in some of these beautiful images of the cymatic patterns, when you drill into it, you get that perfect cross in a circle of the source of the sound. And that's it. The source of the sound is this beautiful cross in a circle, and this is why most of the religious movements have the cross in a circle as their symbol, recognizing that the source of everything in creation is sound, the sound of the Creator. And sound and resonance, it does everything you can imagine. Right? Creates light, levitates, boils water, creates DNA. Sound heals and destroys pathogens, moves beyond the speed of light. I'll explain that. And we have hypersound and laser and Saser technology, not laser, sound lasers, Saser. Sound makes things invisible, energizes the water we drink, so the water actually heals us, and it also energizes the air that we breathe so that we can actually survive from the air that we breathe. Otherwise, we would not survive from the air that we breathe if it wasn't for sound. And very importantly, sound is the precursor to electromagnetism, not the other way around. Sound causes electromagnetism. This is a big one for us to come to terms with. Ancient civilizations understood all this, and they used sound and frequency as a source of energy in every possible way. They used sound and frequency to control and manipulate humanity, and it seems that they were focusing for some reason on our pineal gland. They had to destroy our pineal gland, and the more you study this, the more you realize why that was critical, because it seems that our pineal gland was that third eye that so many of us are aware of, or we keep calling it our third eye, that connected us to everything in creation and allowed us to pick up the frequencies and the invisible, untouchable, unfathomable stuff through the third eye and actually be able to communicate telepathically with everything and everyone and interact not only with other beings, but with other entities and beings and animals and trees and rocks because of our third eye. That thing there is the magic part of our body and our anatomy that's been completely destroyed. And it seems from all these images that they took a lot of time and effort to destroy our pineal gland. And they continue to do so today, as you are aware of. And they used cone-shaped tools to do this. This is a key thing here. You can clearly see the cone-shaped tools, and this is a repetitive theme all the time, and the pineal gland, and also, by the look of it, the DNA, that is obviously the code that creates the pineal gland in our anatomy eventually, and sound and frequency. Notice the magnetic wrist watch here. And I'm giving the game away here because I'm telling you what that is. There is a cone. This guy's holding a cone in his hand, very important cone-shaped tool that he's doing some function with. And there's another cone here on his arm. At first you think, oh, it's just an artistic interpretation of the guy's muscle. No, it's a cone. It's a perfect cone that feeds into this magnetic wrist watch. And you'll know why that's a magnetic wristwatch very soon. And the same kind of control through using frequency and sound and magnetism and electromagnetism that was used in ancient times, the all-seeing eye of Horus, it's still being used by the broadcast companies today. You know, it's encoded in their logos. It's everywhere around us, but we're just too blind to see it. Sound as a tool and technology, very important. Sound creates light. Even this, you attach a LED light to a speaker, and you put a speaker in a noisy place, you light the little LED up. That's spectacular. So it works both ways, light and sound. Every sound frequency has a light frequency, and every light frequency has a sound frequency attached to it. Corey Good, in a recent interview, said that he was in some giant underground cavern somewhere, and there was this invisible source of light. And when he asked, where does the light come from? He was told the light was coming from the sound. The light was being created by the sound. In Egypt, the ankh was used for healing. That was just a resonating device, sound frequency, resonating for healing. The Native American medicine wheel is clearly just a cross in a circle as a source of all things, so from sound to heal people. The Ark of the Covenant is an advanced technology in gold. Obviously, this was a communication device because Moses had to sit on the mercy seat, and then God would tell him what to tell the Israelites when he was sitting on the ark in the mercy seat. That's amazing. I thought God was omnipotent. I thought God could talk to you wherever you were. You didn't have to sit in a specific place to receive a radio frequency signal. And then the Ark of the Covenant obviously brought down the walls of Jericho and destroyed large armies with his arcs that it sparked out. Royal Rife, the man who cured all disease in 1931, he did that with sound and resonance and frequency. Spectacular achievement in curing cancer in the wards. This is his handwritten book that I had the privilege of seeing. It's in a private library in Sedona, Arizona. There's about 700 pages in there, I think, and they are page after page with his own handwritten frequencies for all the different diseases. So I'm thinking to myself, where do these guys that come up with the other Rife machines that you find on the market, where did they get their frequencies from when his original handwritten book is in this library in Sedona? Where did they get their frequencies from? I'm not saying they're lying. I'm just saying that what's probably happening is that people are figuring out what the frequencies are that cure cancer and the prime resonance frequencies that destroy pathogens. I know I said I wouldn't digress to get off the track, but one of my biggest, most exciting obsessions at the moment, and if there are people in this room that can do this, please go away and do this. You know that honey lasts forever. It doesn't go off. It's not affected by viruses, bacteria, pathogens. It's one of those miraculous things. Apparently, the reason that honey does that is because of the frequencies of the bees' wings when they're building their honeycombs and when they're creating and bringing in the honey. So it's a frequency of the bees' wings that creates the hexagonal structure of honeycombs. It's also interesting is that the hexagonal structure is a structure of oxygenated and structured water that cures disease, cancer. I can talk a lot more about this, but again, another rabbit hole. So this is really important. I believe that if we can find, if any one of you can go and record the frequency of bees in a beehive, the buzzing of the bees' wings, and you take that frequency to a lab, a biochemistry lab, and you expose a petri dish of viruses, bacteria, and fungus to the frequency of the bees' wings, I suspect that that frequency will kill the bacteria. Please go ask your friends to do this. And maybe this is a very quick and cheap way to kill cancer and disease and everything else. So let me know once you've done that. Let's tell everybody. George Lakhovsky's multiple wave oscillator is a spectacular device. In fact, my friend Stephen Ross that has that book in Sedona, Royal Rife's book, he also has many other incredible books, and also has a multiple wave oscillator with which he cured his father, listen carefully, he cured his father of quadriplegia. You don't cure people of quadriplegia, right? His father was admitted with quadriplegia into the hospital in the USA. 6 weeks later, he walked out on crutches. The way he treated him is every day he walked in there with a little small handheld portable multiple wave oscillator from George Lakhovsky and treated him for about 45 minutes up and down his spine, after which he exposed him to color light therapy for another hour. He did this for 4 weeks, 6 weeks. His father walked out on crutches. I saw the hospital report. It says, Mr. So-and-so exhibited a remarkable recovery. That's it. It's spectacular. They just won't go there. They will not be, engaged in any explanation. In 2011, Anthony Holland, this is now in a TED Talk, show us which frequencies kill cancer cells. Very briefly, okay, he tells us between 100,000 hertz and 300,000 hertz kills cancer cells. And he shows us in a TED Talk. When I saw this, I went, okay, wow, that's it. The cancer game is over. Thank you. No, it's not. This is how powerful these guys are. They shut you down. They stop you. They prevent you from getting this stuff out.
These are the first videos taken. We showed these videos to our friends in the biology department. They said they hadn't seen anything quite like it. Seems to be a new phenomenon. These organisms are being shattered by our electronic signals. This is a harmless organism, almost friendly, a little Blepharisma. And normally they're very fast swimmers, but when you approach a frequency to which they are vulnerable, they begin to slow down, then they stop, and then they begin to disintegrate within about 3 minutes. So first we attack pancreatic cancer. Take a good look at this slide, because the next one will look quite different. After we treat these cells, they change their shape and size, and they begin to grow long, rope-like structures out the sides. They look something like antennas. I call them bioantennas for biological antennas. It's as if the cancer cells are trying to tune in to our signal. We now know that cancer is vulnerable between the frequencies of 100,000 hertz and 300,000 hertz. So now we attack leukemia cells. Leukemia cell number 1 tries to grow a copy of itself, but the new cell is shattered into dozens of fragments and scattered across the slide. Leukemia cell number 2 then hyperinflates and also dies. Leukemia cell number 3 then tries to make another cancer cell. The new cell is shattered and the original cell dies.
You got the gist of that, right? No need to see any more. You can go look up more of this for yourself. Sound levitates. Just an example how sound can levitate things. But this is not how the ancients levitated 10-ton, 20-ton, and 1,000-ton blocks or mountaintops in ancient times. This is just sound pressure waves in a confined chamber, but it at least gives us an idea that sound can levitate things. I'll talk about how Sazer technology is the tool most likely used for levitating and manipulating and cutting and drilling and so forth. I spoke to David Deek that made this video. He lives on Long Island. He told me they were just amazed how sensitive it was, how they could, by the most subtle frequency change, they could make these things do pretty much anything they wanted. Tumble, bob up and down, spin. And he said they had a great deal of fun with this. Listen to the subtle frequency change and it begins to spin. Yeah. But again, this is not how you levitate, very heavy rocks. There's a whole different technique for that. John Keely did the same. He levitated giant rocks. He crushed giant rocks into fine talcum powder with sound frequencies. He drilled holes with sound frequencies, levitated stuff. So much more we can talk about John Keely. Boy, I actually think that he was probably one of the big inspirations for Nikola Tesla, John Keely. He did so much. Peter Davey was boiling water with sound in New Zealand until he died several years ago. The problem with this, luckily he confined it to that little bubble that ball at the end of his device. Because if you create a frequency that boils water and you just allow that to escape, you're going to explode your body, right? Because our bodies are made up of water. So just a warning, if you think you want to go and find a frequency that boils water, make sure you know what you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to kill yourself and your family and all the people around you. Magnetrons obviously generate huge amounts of energy, and that's just sound. It's a resonant cavity magnetron. Resonant cavity magnetron that's used in laser beams, laser technology, microwaves, all use magnetrons for that technology. Sound acts as a cloak of invisibility. There's so much new information about this. This opens a whole new chapter and debate. There's very advanced new sound cloaking technology right now available. This plastic 3D acoustic pyramid acts as a as an acoustic cloak, make things invisible when you put it underneath it, when you expose that pyramid to specific sound frequencies. And that pyramid is reminiscent of what? Is reminiscent very strongly of Eastern architecture. And when you start looking at this Eastern architecture, once again, you got this resonant thing going up into the sky with a needle and some antenna pointing up at the sky. There was other stuff going on here as well, but I suspect that maybe if you take a bunch of monks and you put them inside the monastery with this weird roof, like that pyramid that make things invisible when you inside it, if you put a bunch of monks in there and you make them chant, maybe at some frequency of chanting, that whole monastery becomes invisible and just is not there. So you got the army marching on you, you just get everybody in the monastery, you begin to chant, and suddenly you're gone. And the army just walks right past you, nothing to see here. It's a great way to avoid confrontation. Sound creates hurricanes. In 2003, these guys lodged a patent to create hurricanes with sound. And then here's another one. Sound creates supercluster galaxies. When I said earlier, the lower the frequency, the larger the cymatic shape. Now you've got a frequency that's 57 octaves lower than middle C, rumbling away from a supermassive black hole in the Perseus cluster in the key of B flat, creating a supercluster galaxy. And it's amazing. This is apparently an image of it. I like the one on the left because when you watch Hans Jenny's Cymatics documentary, that looks identical to the images of lycopodium powder on a metal plate with sound frequencies on it. This is like lycopodium powder that's creating supercluster galaxies. This is insane. So you start to get the idea of as above, so below. There's no end. This is what really disturbs me. The fact that we could put out fire with sound, and yet this has not been employed or used anyway. Why? Because it's not good for business. Pain, suffering, damage is good for business. It keeps expanding the money need and the supply for money. Remember, the moment we stop the growth and the need for money, the entire global financial system collapses. And so we have, inflation and interest and all this, because that's the only way the current money system can carry on operating. And if you want to learn more about this, watch one of my Ubuntu workshops on the internet. And this is just spectacular. These kids developed this little resonator that puts out a fire. 5 seconds. Count it from the moment they put it down to the frying pan to when the fire is out. 5 seconds. Imagine the fire trucks arriving at a burning building. The ladders go up. And instead of fire hoses, a bunch of speakers get switched on and put out this frequency. That fire in the building will be out in literally few seconds or a minute. The entire fire, everywhere, because it'll resonate right through the building. But that's not going to happen, because that's going to save a lot of money and a lot of pain.
We're both graduating from the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department at George Mason University this coming May. We're here, we're just going to test out our device that we use that uses sound frequencies to extinguish flames.
I see this device being applied to a lot of things. First off, I think in the kitchen, it could be on top of a stovetop. But eventually, I'd like to see this applied to maybe swarm robotics, where it'd be attached to a drone, and that would be applied to forest fires or even building fires, where you wouldn't want to sacrifice
5 seconds.
Human life.
Fire was out in 5 seconds. Sound energizes the air we breathe, and this is how we actually oxygenate our bodies and our lungs, or through our lungs, the blood in our veins and our arteries, rather. Because as you breathe, the air that you breathe makes a bloody noise, and it goes into your lungs, and it goes into the smaller and smaller orifices as it moves into your lungs. So it speeds up and speeds up and speeds up, and it goes higher and higher and creates these frequencies. And it's the energy and the sound of the air that you breathe that actually energizes the oxygen in the air. So that oxygen is buzzing as it's moving faster and faster. By the time it reaches your alveoli, and it goes from the alveoli into your artery, from the lungs into the arteries, that oxygen in the air is buzzing and energized from the sound. And that's when it goes into your blood and it's used in the blood and it's stripped of the vibrating energy. And when it's stripped of the vibrating energy, you breathe it out again. And it just repeats that cycle. And that's how we energize the oxygen that we breathe. That don't teach you this at medical school. This never ever gets discussed at medical school because they actually don't know this. I think they don't even know this. In 2011, Luc Montagnier spontaneously generated DNA by exposing a tube of water to certain sound frequencies that had the frequencies of a DNA in it and constituted DNA in an empty test tube. If you can create DNA in an empty test tube with sound, now you start understanding how we can start cloning other species and other creatures just by sound and vibration. And then obviously sonoluminescence, the star in a jar. God said, let there be light. A bubble with brilliant light inside a body of water. Is it possible that all the star systems that we see out there are actually just giant bubbles of light in a never-ending mass of water? I don't know. Sound is the ultimate source of free energy. Nikola Tesla knew this, and I believe that this is how he constructed his energy device, because he knew that the earth ringed like a bell. He talks about it. He tapped into the sound of the earth, just like the guys that built the stone circles tapped into the sound of the earth. And he used that. He could transmit that and use that whichever way he wanted. So now we get to a point where I need to ask you, are we going to take a break for 10 minutes? Because I think we need a little break. And then we've got another hour and a bit to go after that. All right, should we take a 15-minute break? Thanks very much. Okay, everybody, I hope you had time to stretch your legs and get some coffee or something. And it's going to get even more interesting as we get to the second half of this. So, sound, unlimited source of energy, and pretty much if you want to find free energy, and anyone working on free energy technology, if they're not working with sound, they're probably barking up the wrong tree. And again, there's a lot more that I can discuss with you on that front and that level. It's just a little hint. If you're working in that area, try and work with sound and magnetics, and the combination with magnetics and sound. It gets really interesting. Magnets create sound. We all know how speakers work, right? And how speaker magnets work, and the flow of energy either from an electronic source from the plug and creates the moving sound, or vice versa. The moving sound actually moves a magnet and creates an electronic thing going the other way. It works both ways. So sound and magnetism are inextricably connected. Sound creates magnetic fields, and moving magnetic fields create electricity. And therefore, we live in a magneto-electric universe, not an electromagnetic universe. And in there is that subtle deception I was talking about. And that brings me to the particle physics agenda, which has become one of my most favorite subjects and topics. And again, when this penny dropped for me, when I realized that the whole world of science and physics was completely and utterly hijacked and manipulated, it's like one of those things you just can't believe it, because it's such a big, big thing that you really have to be strong going down this path. So basically, the particle physics agenda is there to make us believe that everything in existence and all of creation and the universe and everything in existence is just this never-ending bunch of little particles floating around, bumping into each other randomly, and out of this random interactive bumping into each other, we get creation. A random creation that brings forth everything that we sing, the beauty, the consciousness, the music, and the humanity, and everything in creation comes out of a random act of particles bumping into each other. Right? That is the particle physics agenda. This runs a lot deeper than any of us could imagine or realize, and it goes back a lot further in time. I trace it to about 500 years ago, and you'll see why. And so at the heart of the particle physics agenda is what I call the quantum mechanics rat pack. This is a nice picture from 1927. The only woman there is Madame Curie. Obviously Einstein is right in the middle there with all the big names in physics. Everyone is there. Bohr, Planck, I forget the names now, but they're all there. Heisenberg, etc., etc. And it all starts with, it all sort of culminates in the search for the God particle in more recent times. And it's really important because this takes us to first explaining the standard model in physics today. And the standard model is basically the properties and forces between elementary particles in terms of the standard model are a widely accepted framework for understanding almost everything in the known universe other than gravity. Isn't it great? Because for gravity, they had to use a separate general idea called general relativity. And that's what's used for gravity. So the standard model is in physics is a standard model applied by all people that study physics and all that. And there's a big problem with this. As you can see, already there's duality. We can explain everything other than gravity. Oh. Why? I thought we were so bloody smart. And I can trace back the particle physics agenda beginning in 1492 with Martin of Boheim under instructions or wishes from the King of Portugal that made the first ball Earth, and suddenly Earth becomes a particle. And this is really important because Earth had to be seen as one of those insignificant floating particles in space and time, just like everything else, floating around randomly. And remember, if you watch Carl Sagan and Cosmos, he keeps telling us over and over again, we're an insignificant planet in an insignificant solar system, in an insignificant galaxy, in an insignificant part of the universe. Wow, everything is so freaking insignificant. And that's the agenda here, ultimately. They take the creator out of creation by making everything random, accident, and insignificant. This is really important to try and wrap our heads around. And to promote this particle physics agenda that I truly believe started here, and it is also incidentally during the same year that they sent all the ships around the world to the Americas and to India, around Southern Africa, to go and explore the world, to circumnavigate the world. Okay, there was another agenda behind that. It is all connected. And all of this culminated in the search for the God particle, or the Higgs boson. And this search was insane. And it so happens that the Higgs boson in March 2013 became the most expensive particle ever discovered. Because to achieve this amazing, once again, I believe completely fictitious discovery, they had to build the world's biggest machine called the Large Hadron Collider. Let me remind you again, the bigger the lie, the more we are inclined to believe it. Follow the money. Who funds all these things? It always goes back to the people that control the banks, that control the money system, that control the supply of money. These are the guys that fund all these incredible space programs and hadron colliders, and all the biggest scientific things are funded by the guys with the money because there's an agenda behind it. If you and I try and do something, you know how difficult it is to raise a little bit of money to do any kind of research. These guys build the most ridiculous machines to do the most ridiculous work with that is completely wasteful and just to promote an agenda of deception and lies. So the Large Hadron Collider is the world's largest and most powerful particle collider, the most complex experimental facility ever built, and the largest single machine in the world. It is 17 miles long. It is basically a large circle where they send two particles in opposing directions with the intention to smash them into each other. And once again, this brings us back to the whole reductionist physics philosophy, that if we can smash something up and break it up into the sum of its parts, we can see what it consists of. We know how it works. Oh, really? If you break something up and you see the parts, you know how it works? That's why we know how the body works, right? No. We know what the body is made up of. We got no bloody idea how and why it works or what makes our heart beat. We got no clue. Reductionist physics is the most ludicrous and idiotic concept that anyone has ever come up with. Breaking things up and thinking we can understand it. Why did they need a God particle? This is the big question here. All right? So it starts with a particle physics agenda some 500 years ago, with making us insignificant and blah, blah, blah. But the question is, why did they need this God particle so badly? Why did they build the Hadron Collider? Because they needed a medium for the God particle to move through. And unfortunately, without discovering the God particle, there's no medium for the God particle to move through. And unfortunately, the medium that all scientists, physicists, and great minds of the great past, from the philosophers and Plato and Socrates and all these guys in Greece and all the great minds in all of history, including Einstein and Nikola Tesla and everyone, always referred to as the ether. The ether was the thing that held everything in creation, like a giant energetic web in which everything existed. Unfortunately, the ether was busted and removed from our existence in 1887 by Michelson-Morley in the Michelson-Morley experiment. This was the biggest and most advanced scientific experiment of its time up to that moment. Nothing came even close. Michelson-Morley set out to prove the existence of the ether so that they could show how things are held together by the ether in all of creation. Unfortunately, they failed. They could not prove the existence of the ether. The second part of that is far more dramatic, which I'll get to a little bit later. But the fact that the ether was no longer in existence was a problem, because now the particle physics agenda could not continue imposing its agenda because the particles didn't have a medium through which they could move. You follow this thought? So this is why it became this obsession. And when I discovered this, it all became so bloody clear. What's going on and why they're driving this thing so insanely. But luckily, Nikola Tesla comes along, and he makes it very clear, along with a whole number of great minds, that if you want to find out the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. There are no particles, says Mr. Tesla. In fact, even the electron seems to be a fictitious particle. And this now starts to get very interesting. This is supposed to be a picture of an electron riding on a beam of light. Can you see anything physical there? I see ripples in a pond. I've just dropped a pebble in a pond and I see ripples in a pond, right? That's what it looks like. And that's exactly what it is. So Nikola Tesla tells us that in this interview in 1928, it says that he disagrees with the accepted atomic theory of matter and does not believe in the existence of an electron as pictured by science. Tesla goes further and says that the secret of the universe lies in the beauty of 3, 6, and 9. And anyone that studies the number 3, 6, and 9 will know very quickly that these are the fundamental numbers in vortex maths. Vortex maths is all around 3, 6, and 9. Toroidal fields, vortex, toroidal fields, same thing. Toruses are vortexes, create vortexes. Vortex math is all about studying toroidal fields or donut-shaped stones. Planting a little seed with you. Even Albert Einstein had a problem with the electron. He couldn't understand how the electron could exist with his own understanding of the subatomic particle energetics. I'm not going to read that because it's really confusing the way he states it. But basically he says he can't understand how an electron can exist. And then one of my favorite, Edward Leeds Scullin, the man that built Coral Castle in southern Florida, single-handedly built those huge giant blocks, cut them out, put them on top of each other. 1 hectare of giant 30-ton blocks of coral rock. He says millions of people all over the world are being fooled by the non-existing electrons. Thomson invented an imaginary baby and called it an electron. Rutherford adopted it, and now the men with the long hair are nursing it. I love it. Dr. Manjir Samantha Lawton, that I met in Manchester several years in 2013, wrote this amazing book, and I highly recommend you read it. It reads like a novel. You won't put it down once you start. It's one of my favorite books ever read. Punk Science, where she clearly shows how everything in physics, in science, in biology, everywhere manifests in toroidal fields. Everything is a toroidal field or a torus. Everything starts out as a torus, and especially sound. Sound being the primordial source of everything, because God said, "Let there be light." It's really important for us to understand how sound manifests into toroidal fields, toruses, torus shapes like that. And this is why every time our heart beats, it creates a very powerful toroidal field around our bodies. And because sound does not stand still and sound moves, that moving sound that creates a toroidal field around our body creates a magnetic field, and that moving magnetic field creates an electromagnetic field around our bodies, all because of our bloody beating hearts. Isn't that beautiful? And then you got to ask yourself, what makes your heart beat? And doctors have no answers for that. The toroidal shape of sound. We're now starting to understand how every sound, the letters of the alphabet, the vowels, and even the consonants all have toroidal shapes. Everything manifests in a toroidal field. You cannot get away from it. And then the toroidal field of sound becomes a scalar weapon and turns into scalar technology and a scalar tool. And even color manifests in toroidal shapes and toroidal fields, toruses. Color, because every color has a frequency to it, and every frequency has a sound to it. Light, every light frequency has a sound frequency attached to it, and therefore it is also a torus. And here is a beautiful example how sound, the shapes in nature, the shapes in triangles, the shapes that we find in sacred geometry, how even those shapes have frequencies connected with them. So, while you're watching this little excerpt, keep in mind how important logos are, how important symbols are that ancient cultures and occult organizations have. Every time you look at a symbol, once you've seen this, you'll never think of symbols and logos the same way. Every time you're looking at a logo or a symbol of some organization, you are picking up the frequencies, the sound frequencies that come through the light that travel from that shape. Do not think you're looking at something benign, that it has no effect on you. A shape or an image has as much effect on you as a sound frequency does. When you combine the sound with the image, this is why movies are so powerful. Because now you've got images and the sound entering your being. We are completely brainwashed and hypnotized into a sense of hypnotic existence, believing whatever they want us to believe, whoever they are, the puppet masters, the guys that control the bankers. We will never know who they are. Why? Because they don't want us to know. It's that simple. If the sheep farmer doesn't want to know, if the sheep doesn't want his sheep to know what TV channels he watches at night, the sheep will never know what TV channels our farmer watches at night. It's that simple. So this is a great little documentary that my friend Eric Rankin, who lives in Laguna Beach, I see him every year when I go to the United States because he runs a lovely radio show in Laguna Beach, so we do lovely interviews on his radio show, and he did this amazing documentary. I really recommend you watch his whole thing. It's about 30 minutes long. It's fantastic. Sonic geometry, but this is just a little taste of it.
As an experiment, let's take a look at the numbers found in basic geometric shapes, then apply those numbers as vibration cycles to hear the tones they produce. First, let's listen to what the 180 total degrees contained in a triangle sound like. And here's a squares and circles 360 in cycles per second. A perfect octave up from the triangle. What about the pentagon at 540? That sounds like a harmonic fifth of the other two. That's interesting. What are these tones? They are F sharp and its perfect harmonic fifth of C sharp. Let's keep going. What does a hexagon 720 sound like? Another F sharp. Here's a 7-sided septagon, which totals 900. This is an A sharp, which happens to be the note required to complete an F sharp major chord in perfect 3-part harmony. And finally the octagon, where we get 1080, another C sharp. Suddenly, geometry is expressed by tones, and these tones just happen to create the most beautiful form of music, a perfect 3-part major chord in the key of F sharp. As an
That's just to whet your appetite. Watch the whole documentary. It is beautiful. So let's bust the dogma of science. There are no particles. Okay, everything originates in toroidal fields of resonance, and it starts with the subatomic particles like the electron. Electron is simply a coherent resonance in a toroidal field. And this is really what an electron looks like, something like this. The torus model of the electron. Everything manifests in toroidal fields. Nothing is exempt from this. Atoms are toroidal fields. Atoms are not these crazy things that we've shown as atoms today, the atomic model that we get shown today. That is that's a theory. It was never been proven to be absolutely accurate, and this is why it's so difficult to work with atomic structures and atomic field science. It's so complex because they just seem to be barking up the wrong tree. Ilya Lakitsevich, who was with me at the Ubuntu Festival in South Africa, is one of the world's leading plasma physicists, and he's one of the strongest proponents of a toroidal atomic structure. We had a long discussion at my place there at Stone Circle in Watervalboven about the toroidal atomic structures. Here's a fascinating image of a molecular torus of the carbon monoxide molecule. It's really important. You can see this is actually like an image of a carbon monoxide molecule, and you notice the similarity of this image, creating a toroidal field going into the center, compared to the magnetic field in a cone shaped, because it seems that magnetic fields naturally form in cone shapes, because again, a torus from the top and from the bottom. There's a cone that goes into the top and a cone that comes to the bottom. And where the two cones meet, actually creating a toroidal field. So the magnetic fields of a torus actually take on a cone shape. And here's an image. Remember this image. And here's an image, a cross-section of a magnetic cone. You can see the similarity. So the fact that toruses and cones are inextricable becomes a very important thing for us to grasp. You cannot separate cone technology or cones and magnetic or toroidal fields. The two work, they're the same thing. And that reminds us that the solar system is a toroidal field as well, with everything being accreted at the disk. And the galaxy is a torus. And so it goes from the electron, the atom, solar system, galaxy. What's missing in between? The Earth. The Earth cannot be an exception. I'll leave you with that. I believe we live in a fractal, multidimensional, toroidal nature of reality. Very simple. This is by far the most closest image I've ever come across from the brilliant Alex Gray. It is completely mesmerizing. You can get lost in that painting for hours and hours. And this is why I believe it is so difficult to navigate through space. Because whatever space is, because right now we have no bloody idea, I might be completely wrong, it might not be water, it might be something else, it could be custard. But I believe that if space is this, if this is actually what creation is all about, these fractals, multidimensional, interconnected toroidal fields, small ones within large ones, it must be incredibly difficult to navigate space. And that's when the saying becomes really important. If you don't know who you are and where you come from, how could you possibly know where you're going? Because once you get out in space, if you don't know where you come from, you may never ever come back. And this is why in movies like Stargate, they go through a circle of water, right, to go into the wormhole. And often they get lost because they forget their coordinates. They don't know where the coordinates are. And they get lost in space, in wherever the hell they are. And they got to work very hard to get back to where they came from. So what I'm sharing here with you is probably a lot closer to the truth than the image of space we've been given. No. The importance of magnetism is really critical for us to understand that everything has magnetic properties. This is a short little 4-minute video from UCLA that really hits the nail right on the head.
You might not think of water as being magnetic, but it is, and so are graphite, aluminum, and glass. This is a new and different category of magnetism called either para or diamagnetism, and it's different from the magnetism that you're used to. You're probably already familiar with ferromagnetism. Ferro means iron. An unmagnetized piece of iron, or nickel or cobalt, becomes a magnet in the presence of a magnetic field. The effect is strong and lasts even after the magnet is removed. Paramagnetism is a similar effect, except that it's much weaker and temporary. Aluminum is a good example of a paramagnet. And so is oxygen, which is attracted to magnets. Here, I have a few milliliters of liquid oxygen, which sticks to the magnet. I'll explain why later.
So remember, water and oxygen.
Gadolinium oxide and cupric sulfate are good examples of paramagnetic substances. Cupric sulfate is a salt that can be picked up by a magnet. Diamagnetic materials are exactly the opposite of paramagnetic. They are always repulsed. They would rather die than be in a magnetic field. An important example of a diamagnetic material is graphite. This specially made pyrolytic graphite is repelled by a magnetic field. Don't be confused. This is not static electricity or eddy currents. Graphite is repelled by a magnet, always, both by the north and south end. Pyrolytic graphite is a grown crystal of flat carbon layers which maximizes the diamagnetic effect. Of course, the best diamagnets are superconductors, which at low temperatures provide exact opposite repulsion to whatever magnetic field is present when they're chilled. They are perfect diamagnets. The most famous and powerful diamagnetic is bismuth, element number 83 on the periodic table. The bismuth-powered boat sails toward the weaker magnetic fields.
Okay, you got it. So magnetic fields create toroidal shapes. You can even see it if you put a magnet down like this, and the iron filings clearly show the toroidal shape immediately. But the perfectly balanced toroidal shape, or the balanced magnetic torus, looks like this. And once again, I think we've been fooled by being taught about positive and negative, because in the perfectly balanced magnetic field, there seems to be no positive and negative. It seems to be the same charge working in opposite direction, one coming from the top and the other one coming from the bottom. And this is really interesting, that needs to be discussed and investigated a lot more. So this is the torus spinning from the top down and from the bottom up in opposing directions, the same same energetic field. And where they meet in the middle, where that bright green dot is in the middle, that is what some people refer to as the 0 point, or as Nassim Haramein calls it, the vacuum. That's where you enter the infinite vacuum of the infinite density of creation. And we can thank Nassim for giving us the physics papers that show that the density of the vacuum is infinite. So, therein lies the important understanding how sound moves faster than the speed of light, because the resonance and the sound frequencies that get sucked into the torus, that's what they do. They suck it in and they also give it out. Actually, what the torus does, it pulsates all the time. It pulsates like this because it's moving. Sound moves. So it pulsates, goes in and out all the time. So there's stuff going in and there's stuff coming out. And as it meets at the center there, that's the 0 point, or entering the infinite density of the vacuum of creation. Out of that infinite density, everything in creation seems to manifest. And it is at that point that you get the accretion disk that is then spread out at the galactic torus, the toroidal galactic equator, okay, or the disk. But, now quickly, the denser the medium, the slower the speed of light. If you put light through a medium, the denser the medium, the more it slows down the light. The converse is true for sound. The denser the medium, the faster the speed of sound. That's why sound travels faster in water than it does in air. So how fast does sound travel in an infinitely dense medium? Infinitely fast. Okay. So every thought that you have is a frequency. Every word you say is a frequency. Every move your muscles make is a frequency that creates an effect around you. Every time you think, you move, everything you do goes into the toroidal field that's made up in your body, that makes up your body, the atoms of the molecules of the muscles and everything in your body at the atomic level goes into that central toroidal structure of your atoms. It goes into that central point, or the vacuum, that infinite density, and from that it is available to everyone everywhere in creation. And this is why ancient people knew how to communicate with anyone everywhere across all space and time. Because every thought you have is immediately available to everyone everywhere in all of creation. That's if our pineal glands are switched on. This is why I believe these bird-headed beings worked so very hard to destroy our pineal glands. That's starting to make sense. Otherwise, why would they spend so much time and energy and depict it? Destroy the pineal glands. So, now we have a better understanding of a fully balanced magnetic torus, which is also a sound torus, and everything else comes from that. We understand that it is the sound of the earth that creates the magnetic fields. The sound, the earth rings like a bell, right? It is not the molten iron core at the center of the earth that creates the magnetic field. It's another lie we've been told. Somebody came up with somewhere along the line. And because molten iron doesn't have a magnetic field in any case. It has to be solid. And even that is a problem, because as we see it right now, we have a half a magnetic field floating around in space, because a fully balanced magnetic field has the 0 point in the center, not a north on the one side and a south on the other. How is it possible that the earth has a half a magnetic field, is floating around an infinite universe of perfectly balanced toruses, and here we have an imbalanced half a magnetic field? Something is wrong with the story. So I'm suspecting that the earth, like everything else, like electrons, atoms, solar systems, and galaxies, must be a toroidal nature. And that's what balanced toruses look like. It has the accretion disk at the center. Energy comes at the top and at the bottom, and where they meet, it creates the accretion disk. The torus equator plane emits energy and matter in a disk like that. And you see this in the solar system torus, the disk of the solar system. And they tell us, NASA keeps telling about the solar disks, how the solar systems are created by water in space and creating a solar disk. And then they show us pictures of it. This is one of the best photographs ever taken of a young star and its protoplanetary disk. And they show us galactic disk toruses at the disk at the center of the galaxies. We see thousands and thousands of galactic disks floating around in space, and we're okay with galactic disks and solar disks. But when it comes to the Earth, we go, I don't know, no, it can't be a disk. Dynamics of galactic disks. When you start studying this, it's all there. All they keep telling us about galactic disks and solar disks and everything. It never stops. It's a never-ending educational process. And that brings us to identifying what the magnetic fields actually look like. Thank God for the ferrolens cell, which is not discovered not that long ago. We can now see what the magnetic fields actually look like in a beautiful toroidal shape. This is what the magnetic fields look like in toroidal fields. And I believe that these are actually what Mr. Ley found, that are now called ley lines. He just really discovered the lie of the magnetic fields and the connectedness of all the magnetic fields on Earth, on the surface. What happens when you bring a magnet close to a ferrofluid? Something magic. Little tiny cones pop out. And you start seeing the interconnectedness between magnetism, cones, and toroidal shapes. You cannot separate those. Sound and magnetism effects in nature. It's all around us. You see how sound is responsible for pretty much all the shapes. And once you watch Hans Jenny Cymatics documentary, you realize how spectacular that is. When you put a ferrolens cell over a speaker magnet, we see something magic. Loads of tiny little cones facing the center. Does it remind you of something? Yes, it reminds me of this guy's wristwatch. Okay? Bingo. There you got it. Somehow these guys were using magnetics and sound and cone technology with magnets and cone there. You can't separate them. And this is the technology they used to manipulate humanity and many other things. And this is where I bring you to the tools and artifacts in my museum that I've been collecting from the ancient ruins in southern Africa, giving us a very clear indication that these ancient people were using this technology. Toroidal stones, torus stones, with cone-shaped tools to do all this amazing stuff that our archaeologists are still telling us that the stone toruses and cones, our archaeologists are still telling us that these stones were made by people in the Stone Age as weights for digging sticks. I don't even know what to say to those people. You know, like, I don't know. Cone-shaped tools and ancient technology. Once I started studying this, it blew my mind. It is a completely missed and misunderstood and ignored part of ancient civilization. Cones in all ancient cultures, in South Africa, in England, in Egypt, cones everywhere. In Australia, this Mayan deity is holding 2 cones. The importance of holding 2 cones is really critical. I'll explain to you why I believe that is so. This guy's healing, this is a Sumerian statue, healing somebody with cone-shaped tools. Cone-shaped hats used in special ceremonies. Wizards wear cone-shaped hats, and their wands are cone-shaped. And then obviously the cones of these ancient beings that were doing something to us or humans. And this is important to realize. When Caesar technology was first introduced to us, only in 2009 was Caesar technology introduced to humankind. And this is when the cone-shaped technology becomes important, when sound is propelled into a Caesar beam. So what happens when you put sound into a cone? It speeds up, speeds up, speeds up. By the time it leaves the tip, it is moving faster than the speed of light. It becomes what's known as hypersound and a Caesar. And that sound, as that sound frequency enters the 0 point of the toroidal field, at which point it basically creates this infinitely fast Caesar beam. What happens to that Caesar beam? That Caesar beam is surrounded by incredibly powerful magnetic fields because of the toroidal nature of that Caesar beam. So now you've got the Caesar beam that is surrounded by an incredibly powerful magnetic field. If you use this cone as a tool, you can channel your thoughts as a frequency, into your hand holding this tool, so you don't need any other source of anything. You just need yourself, your thoughts, and a cone. Now don't try this at home. Or maybe try it if you have luck. Let us just share that with the world. So you can channel your thoughts, and that the frequency of your thought then gets channeled through the cone and becomes a Caesar beam. Your thought, the energy of your thought becomes a Caesar beam. So if you're thinking, I want to chop down that mountain, I want to cut that mountain, it's that thought, that energy goes into the Caesar beam. And this, I believe, how they did it, because there seems to be very little other evidence for this other than this. They thought, in fact, we have many channelings that suggest the same thing for those people that believe in channeling and shamanic information. So it was they used their thoughts through their hands into the cone and chop the mountain down. I'm going to cut that mountain with my Caesar beam. Remember, you can't see a Caesar beam, so it's not very impressive. Laser beams are far more impressive, but infinitely less powerful. Caesar beam, cut the mountain off. Okay, honey, where would you like that? And this is where you need a second Caesar beam, second cone. This is why that Mayan deity holding two cones. Because once you got two Caesar beams running, you got two powerful magnetic fields, and you can trap the tip of that mountain between the two magnetic fields and go, okay, honey, where would you like that? Over there? Cool. A little left? A little more? Okay, thank you. And this, I believe, how simple it should be. Because once you got this technology, you can pretty much do everything. And this is why we see giant ancient trees chopped down. How did they chop that giant tree down? Probably with a Caesar kind of technology. And let your mind just take it from there. We have these beautiful cone-shaped tools in the Rosicrucian Museum in San Jose that are engraved with cuneiform text that tell us that these cones were used in the construction of the temples of Sumer. Now, how would you use a cone in the construction of the temple of Sumer? And one of them mentions the temple of Inanna being built with these cone-shaped tools. And then to the rescue comes Ed Leeds Skalnin, the man that built Coral Castle, this incredible place at the southern Florida. And he was seen levitating those giant blocks with ice cream cones in his hands. And this is why I call it the ice cream cone phenomenon. Just like that Mayan dude with two ice cream cones, he was seen holding two ice cream cones levitating those giant blocks. I hope that this is starting to, provide a really interesting body of interesting evidence of how this stuff works. And that brings us to dragonflies and other beetles and bugs whose bodies are too big for their wings. Those are not blood vessels in the dragonfly. Those are hollow tubes. And the dragonfly doesn't flap its wings like a bird. It vibrates them and buzzes them. It's the buzzing of those wings, the sound of those wings that goes into the tubes, the hollow tubes. And at the bottom of those hollow tubes, there are hundreds of tiny little cones. So the sound frequency goes out of the cones, creating these toroidal fields around the butterflies and the dragonfly's wings, putting them into a state of gravity-free zone around them because of the cone-shaped technology in their wings. And the same for Viktor Grebennikov, the man who studied the bugs that were too big to fly, and then he learned how to use the bug's wings to build a levitation platform. He wrote a whole book about this. He built this levitation platform. He talks about it. Unless people know this technology, they think he's a crank. He's just talking rubbish. Well, I believe he's actually telling us exactly what's going on here. And it looks like he had a motorbike handle on that device and just cranked up the frequency. And at some frequency, that sound through the bug's wings would have created that toroidal field around his little levitation device. He said that he moved faster than the speed of sound on that levitation platform. And because you've got this balanced toroidal field around you that he somehow managed to create, it wasn't dangerous. And then he started studying the bug's wings, and look at the image on the left here of the shape of these the wings of these insects, these beetles. Okay, pay attention, very close attention to that structure there. Okay, this is just a video. I'm not even going to show this to you because we're running out of time. How some of them claim that they levitate on top of each other. Some people say this is a hoax, but they probably don't know how it works. They don't know about the cone-shaped technology.
Today we're going to try.
And then we get back to the Taurus stones that emit powerful sound and frequencies. We've measured sound energies coming out of the Taurus stones, very, very powerful frequencies. Some of them give us up to 3,400 decibels of sound. That's very, very powerful stuff. Very high frequencies. You can't hear it, but it affects your body. Also, what I've been noticing is that these Taurus stones can act as intentional tools. If you put your intention into it, it amplifies your thoughts, amplifies your intentions, these Taurus stones. So they could be very good or very dangerous. And basically, like we said, it's scalar technology, scalar vortex Taurus effect. As it goes in, it goes into that infinite vacuum, the density of the vacuum, and then creates a bigger torus around it. And this happens simultaneously because of that infinite density of that vacuum, that 0 point. We put one of these Taurus stones in a bucket of water. The next morning, there were thousands of bubbles going around, spiraling into the center of the Taurus stone. We've only done this once, but once is good enough for me. And then the Taurus stone that I took to Nassim Haramein in 2013, it became famous now. I've got it back in my possession. This Taurus stone I threw into my bag. How many of you have heard the story? Okay, so not that many people. Okay, good, so I can tell it. So I packed this in bubble wrap and threw it in my hand luggage, and we left for Chicago via Doha, Qatar. You know, this is Arab airport on steroids, all the latest technology. And when we got onto the airplane to go to Chicago, we got delayed, and we were like 20 minutes late. And eventually, they called my partner off the plane, and we got to the door, and the thing was gone already, that spacewalk thing, and there was a staircase going down, and suddenly I saw it was my bag there. So they cross-labeled our bags. So I walked down thinking, oh my God, my stone is in the bag. It's the stone. What am I going to tell them? I can't tell them this is ancient advanced technology. This is not going to go down well. So I think, okay, it's African arts and crafts. Cool, African arts and crafts. So I get down there and I'm really nervous. There are 5 guys with guns, and I'm sweating, so I'm hoping that their fingers aren't sweating on the trigger. And open my bag. They open your bag. There's a security thread in your bag. So I open my bag, and I know it's a stone. So I go straight and I pull out the stone. It's wrapped in bubble wrap and packing tape. I have no idea how I opened it, because it's virtually impossible to open that with your bare fingers. You know what I mean? It's like, and somehow I opened it and it popped out. I said, you see, it's a stone from my friend in Hawaii, and African arts and crafts. And there was one African guy there that leaned over. He didn't have a gun, and he leaned over their shoulders, and he said, oh, I've seen one of those before. And I only realized months later that he probably diffused the tension. When I got back on the plane, so they said, okay, good, put it back in your bag, and bag goes on the plane. I get back on the plane, sit down, and when I sit down, my partner says to me, when the captain came out of the cockpit, he said, whatever is in that bag crashed the TSA security system. So it came from the captain. It didn't come from me or anybody else. The captain volunteered that information to us. So we have the USA, TSA, Homeland Security to thank for proving scientifically that we're dealing with ancient advanced technology. But what got me only about 2 years later, because it's traumatizing, this kind of thing. It's really scary, very scary. Okay, I make joke light of it now, but it's really scary. I mean, I was petrified. And realized only 2 years later, they never asked me to check the rest of my bag. You see where I'm going with this? They knew exactly what they were looking for. And when I showed it to them, thank you, next, just wanted to check. Okay, so very importantly, these are Klerksdorp spheres, most amazing spheres in the world, among the top 10 most strangest artifacts found on Earth. And I was given one of these spheres in 2008 as a present by my friend, and I put it in the museum. And a few months later, I came back, and I walked in one morning, and the stone developed a crack. This is 4 billion year old stone, right, or 3 billion year old stone. They're known as some of the oldest stones on Earth, and yet people believe that they are man-made, or they're made by intelligent design. They're not accidental. So very precious. So now I think, oh my goodness, the stone developed a crack. I broke the stone. So what do I do? Do I glue it together? Do I just leave it? So eventually I decide, no, I'm just going to leave it. Let me just leave it there. And I keep coming back every day, and gradually the crack gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And one day I walked in there, and the whole stone just cracked into 2 halves, just lay there. I was just stunned. I couldn't believe it. This is the 3 billion year old present from a friend, and I break it. It's my fault. So I thought, what do I do? So I just left it. And then it started cracking again. And then it stopped. One day it stopped. I'm going to show you this little video to show you what's going on right now. I recently noticed that my Wonderstone that cracked and broke some 11 years ago when I first put it into the museum, into several pieces, has developed a new crack. And this is a very significant new event here in the Stone Circle Museum. That's what remains of the original Wonderstone. These are known as the Klerksdorp spheres. They're mysterious stones that are billions of years old, and many people believe that they're actually made by intelligent beings, that they're not natural formations. And this is a huge breakthrough observation, because this stone that was given to me as a gift for the museum in early 2008, after about 6 months of me placing it in the museum, cracked and started developing a big crack, and eventually after several months just split into 2, and then it continued breaking and splitting more and more. Eventually ended up in these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces, and a few smaller ones. And it's been like this for at least 10 years now. And then suddenly I noticed the other day when I had a tour group in here that the large piece has just developed a new crack. And this is a huge new, discovery, because there's the crack that's busy developing. Okay, I'm going to stop it there because we're running out of time. So what happened here? The Taurus stone that crashed the TSA security system was lying 3 meters away from that stone. When I removed that Taurus stone, it stopped cracking. A year ago, I brought new Taurus stones. I put them underneath the broken pieces, and within a few months, it started cracking again. So the Taurus stones have a profound influence, and it's breaking and cracking this Klerksdorp sphere. Creator Mutwa told me that these Klerksdorp spheres were originally sources of light, that they would light up, brilliant light would come out of them like a light bulb if it was exposed to certain subtle frequencies. At first I thought he was crazy. Now I'm beginning to think that maybe he was right, because these Klerksdorp sphere stones can't handle the intense energies from the Taurus stones, and this is why they're breaking and cracking. Cone-shaped tip for the laser device. We've spoken about this already. Taurus and cone combination. This is built into our own human anatomy. We have this in our eyes. We have rods and cones in our retina. So at the back of our eyes, we have like this laser dish that's catching all the light and the frequencies coming through our eyes from the front, and the cones are facing backwards in the retina and shooting, turning the sound and the frequencies of the light, turning it into Sazer beams, shooting it through the optic nerve into the pineal gland. Isn't that remarkable? That our retinas are like satellite dishes, amplifying the light and the sound frequencies and sending it to our pineal gland. Oh my goodness. And what's at the front of our eyes? At the front of our eyes, we have not cones, but toruses. We have beautiful toruses at both our eyes. Our irises are little tiny toruses with a lens in the middle. that focuses the light and the sound coming through that with the light. This is just spectacular. This torus-cone combination is all over in our own anatomy, and this is why we should be able to do this, all of us, and so much more. In 2017, November, the Saab Award, which is a big deal military award, Saab Science Award, was won by this guy called Henrik Holter for developing a new antenna. It's called the phase ray antenna. It's a plate with a bunch of cones on it. Here's a close-up of it. It is the most powerful antenna ever built, thousands and thousands of times stronger than any antenna before. And it can both send and receive cones on a metal plate. Pay attention to that structure. Can you see the similarity between the bug's wings and that antenna? And the plot thickens. Everything that we do in science, technology, in development, it's all just mimicking nature, biomimicry. And this is why when we start looking at free energy, we should look at sound and magnetism. Unfortunately, Isaac Newton knew nothing about magnetism. This was a shock to the system when I discovered this. And this is why we have so much problems, but there's a lot more to discuss because Newton was a smart guy. I actually believe he was put up to writing that crap that we all teach our kids at school today, the whole Newtonian physics thing, just to distract us from what's really going on. And this is why gravity is completely nonsensical. We observe it, we can't explain it, we don't really understand it, and yet the whole effect of gravity is perfectly equally described by Coulomb. In Coulomb's law, it works exactly the same, except it's described as an electric phenomenon. And if it's an electric phenomenon, it means it must be an electromagnetic phenomenon, which means it's a magnetic phenomenon, which means it's a sound phenomenon. So it's much easier to describe gravity as a magnetic effect. And suddenly everything becomes very, very clear, and we can explain everything about our reality. Sound creates magnetic fields, moving magnetic fields create electricity, and we live in a magneto-electric universe. Even the precessional wobble of the Earth can be explained with a magnetic toroidal precession. Everything falls into place, and that brings me back to the ether and the obsession with the ether and finding the ether. In 1887, Michelson-Morley did that famous experiment in search of the ether. Unfortunately, what they were going to do, they were going to show that the ether exists by showing how the Earth moves through space. Well, it didn't work because they couldn't find any evidence for the Earth moving through space, and this is why they couldn't find evidence for the ether. Can you see which of those is the more important discovery there? The ether is okay, because the ether we now understand is to be sound and resonance and frequency holding everything together. But the fact that the Earth is not moving through the ether, that is a much bigger problem. And that still remains. The Michelson-Morley experiment has never been proven to be false or inaccurate. They've attempted to do that, and they claim they've attempted to do that. Military guys have attempted to do that. They've never really done that successfully. So as it stands, the Earth does not move through space according to the Michelson-Morley experiment. The ether is then replaced by the particle physics agenda and the particle physics universe, where particles move around, bumping into each other randomly, spontaneously creating everything in creation that we observe by random coincidence. And in a documentary called The Principle, we even have Michio Kaku tell us very clearly that there is no scientific evidence that the Earth actually moves through space. I'm not saying this. I'm repeating what Michelson-Morley found and what many other scientists have since been talking about. This is a big problem. This is why the God particle became such a big obsession and why the quantum mechanics rat pack was used to promote this particle physics agenda. Unfortunately, these are brilliant people. I'm not saying they were in on it. They were brilliant scientists, brilliant minds. But remember, who ran the media? Who paid for the laboratories and their experiments and the labs and the universities? Always follow the money. So they just used these brilliant minds to promote their agenda, and they only published what they wanted to promote that agenda. Very simple. It's so beautiful. So that by 1897, J.J. Thomson wins a Nobel Prize for discovering a theoretical particle called the electron. Are you aware of this? That it was a theoretical particle, the electron. It's insane. Okay, you can see how desperate they were to push this agenda. And the Heisenberg uncertainty principle tells us that there's so much more going on that we don't know. And anyone that claims they understand quantum mechanics is insane, as many of these guys said before. It was just stupid or arrogant. And that Max Planck's quantum leap actually tells us that matter biolocates, that matter can disappear in one place and reappear in another place, because in the quantum leap, the electron disappears from the one level and miraculously appears in another level. It doesn't move gradually from one to the other. It jumps, it leaps, disappears, appears. Whoa, hold on. But again, Max Planck was a brilliant guy. He was a really deeply conscious guy. This is what he said. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. Now, I would much rather have spoken to this guy that thinks like this than the guy that was presented to us by the media. There are no particles, just resonance and frequency. Electron is simply coherent resonance in a toroidal field, and Rutherford's atomic model in 1909, 1911 is just so simple and so naive. And unfortunately, anyone that embraces the toroidal nature of things can bust this experiment in 5 seconds flat. And unfortunately, that atomic model still stands today. You all know this logo. We see it bloody everywhere, right? They're still shoving this down our throats with a strong force, holding that stuff in the middle together. We had no idea what that is. But fortunately for us, no matter how insane or psychotic these guys that control the bastions of knowledge at universities, no matter how insane they are, fortunately, we have the double-slit experiment, which clearly says that there are no particles. There's just frequency and resonance. But even at that point of defeat, they become psychotic, and they say, they're holding onto the particles, and they say, well, it's a particle-wave duality. It's both a particle and a wave. No, your brain is I don't know. Einstein's theory of relativity is a fascinating one. Obviously, Einstein was a smart guy, and once again, I believe that he was used and they published what they wanted to promote their agenda. But even the EMC square thing just flies out the window if space is a vacuum, right? So if space is a vacuum, there's nothing there. And in a vacuum, there can be no particles, there's nothing, there can be no energy. And there can be no mass for anything because there's nothing there. So energy equals mass times the speed of light square. Mass in space is 0. So if you multiply 0 by anything, it remains 0. That means energy in space is 0, and that's not possible because space is full of energy. So that equation holds absolutely no water if you just give it a little bit of thought. And this is why the Higgs boson became so important, the God particle, because until they found the God particle, there was no medium for the particles to move through. Thank God for Peter Higgs and his Higgs boson and the God particle, because now they had a field and a medium through which particles could move. 2013, they rescued that situation. Unfortunately for them, Homer Simpson discovered the Higgs boson about 10 years prior to that already, as they do. And to finish on a lighter note, or a slightly more disturbing note, Max Tegmark is one of the biggest names in astrophysics and science today. He's the guy that heads up the MIT background cosmic microwave radiation research. And you can watch this in the movie The Principle. Please watch it. It'll shake up your reality quite badly. And I think the time for shaking up our reality is here. I quite like it. It makes me rethink everything, personally. So Max Tegmark in this documentary is actually shown when they came back with the research of this background cosmic radiation. And he was just freaking out. He was scratching his head because what they found and what he says is that the earth is at the center of the universe. And everything spins around the earth. Everything moves around the earth. In fact, it is so at the center that everything, the entire universe as we know it, is even aligned with the ecliptic, the equinoxes and the solstices on earth. And there seem to be these onion rings areas moving away from the earth that certain other activity happens, as if we're at the center of some atomic structure and things happening in these waves around us, moving away from us. And he just says, he shakes his head and he goes, I don't know what's going on. The jury is out. Don't ask me any more about this. And that came from the cosmic background radiation. The earth is at the center of everything in creation, of our known universe. What that means to me, how I interpret this, if creation is infinite, from our perspective and our point of view, we are at the center of everything, because everything revolves around us. If creation is infinite, so yes, it makes absolute sense. But if you put limits to the universe and limits to creation, then that doesn't make any sense at all. So we need to start redefining what we think our universe is and how finite or infinite our universe is. Because if we're at the center of it, then there can be no finity. There must be only infinity. And that brings me to the fact that everything is just connected through the fractal nature of resonance that creates magnetic fields and toroidal fractals throughout all of creation. And even when you look at the very famous Mandelbrot fractals, spectacular images that are created by this fractal mathematical formula, it's just spectacular. You see all the shapes in creation, all sacred geometric shapes and spirals that just go on and on and on forever. And what I found fascinating is that at some stage while I was looking at the Mandelbrot fractals, I found a heartbeat. Bingo. And there's another heartbeat. And you start thinking, what is going on? Is everything just a bloody simulated computer freaking program? And are we just part of that? What's going on here? I don't know. I really don't know anymore. All I know is I want to keep an open mind and I keep asking these juicy questions. Because the juicier the questions, the more interesting the answers are. And if anybody ever tells you, don't do this or don't research that or how can you talk about that, you know that you're obviously going down a road that makes people uncomfortable and you're probably on the right track to something. So the more questions we ask, the more mysterious things become. And the big question is, what do we do with all this knowledge and information? Because tomorrow morning we wake up, we go back to our slave jobs and we go back into the machine. And most of us forget about this, and all of this flies out the window. If we can't put this information to good use, it's completely bloody useless. And this is where the whole philosophy of Ubuntu and contributionism comes in and shines a bright light at the future of humanity, providing very simple solutions to what seems to be an insurmountable problem that most people think we cannot get out of. The answer is, we can get out of this insanity. All we have to do is change the way we think. We're the ones we've been waiting for, and it's up to us in rooms like these around the world from where the answers and the solutions will come. So, the responsibility is now on your shoulders. None are more enslaved than those who believe or falsely believe they are free. Wolfgang Goethe's famous, most beautiful statement, and the emphasis there is on falsely believe they are free, because we are not born free. We are born into absolute and utter slavery. From the first breath we take to the last breath we break out, we can't move around freely, can't live where we choose to. We need passports and work permits. We have to follow rules and laws that we never agreed to. We have to work to survive. We have to earn this thing called money. We have to pay taxes to escape jail time. This is not freedom. This is pure and utter slavery. And the thing that enslaves us is money. That's the tool of enslavement. It is the socio-economic political system that is controlled and driven by money. But it's not about the money or how much money you have. It's about the control of money. It's those who control the supply of money, not how much money you have. So money is the tool by which we are enslaved until we come to terms with what money is, where it comes from, how it was created. We will remain the subjects of those who control the creation and the supply of money. Our system is broken. You know this by now. I don't have to remind you. It cannot be fixed, and it certainly cannot be fixed by using the same tools that created the problem. Otherwise, we just go around like lab rats on that bloody wheel, right? Money was maliciously introduced as a tool of enslavement. You need to really internalize this. Money is not there to help us. It was introduced as a tool of enslavement, as a wholly, complete, finished idea and philosophy and concept, introduced into humanity at a very specific point in time. And that specific point in time was when the kingdom was lowered to earth from heaven. And we'll read this very clearly in the Sumerian text on the Sumerian kings lists. That's where we first discover the first royal bloodlines. We see the appearance of the first kings, and the royal bloodlines suddenly appear, wholly formed, wholly controlling everything, still controlling it today. And they were given weapons of mass destruction and fierce weapons with which to smite the people if the people didn't want to listen to them. Otherwise, nobody would have bloody listened to them. Of course they wouldn't. Hey, I have a great idea. I wake up in this morning in my village, call my village people together, say, listen, guys, I've got a great idea. As of today, I'm going to be the king. And all the land now belongs to me. Right? And you all going to work for me. I'm the king. But in return, I'm going to let you live on the land, and we have this amazing relationship where I'm the king and you work for me and we all work together. No, I don't think so. So where did the first royal bloodlines come from? Very simple. When you start studying the Sumerian text, you see they were forced upon humanity with fierce weapons with which they smited the people if they didn't listen. And when you read the ancient text, how much smiting actually went down. There's a lot of smiting in ancient times. And it's these first kings that suddenly owned all the land. They became the first bankers. And the temples became their first banks, the temples that they lived in. It's from those temples that they started to issue the first forms of money in the form of clay tablets as forms of bills of exchange, promissory notes, and negotiable instruments. Exactly the same way that banks create money today. Nothing has changed. That is what blows my mind. It's exactly the same bloody system, except they did it on clay. Today we do it on paper. It is just insane. Solving our problems are very simple, but we cannot solve our problems with the same kind of thinking that we used when we created them. We all need a whole new kind of thinking. That thinking is to free the world from money. But how do we do that? We create an alternative social structure in which money is no longer needed. But we can't do that with violence, opposition, or conflict. We can only do that with a new kind of thinking, with no resistance, no protest, no opposition, no violence, no conflict. All of these belong into the old paradigm. So only by embracing the tools of enslavement and turning the tools of enslavement into tools of liberation, we will finally liberate ourselves from this. If we continue the path of violence, opposition, and conflict, we go down the same path over and over and over again. And this is what's taken me and the Ubuntu movement 12 years to figure this out. It's been an interesting journey of discovery. We went into politics in 3 different countries, only to realize the moment you go into politics, you become an opposition party. And that gets you absolutely nowhere. So that led to the concept of one small town can change the world. And all we have to do is change the word competition into cooperation and collaboration, and everything changes perfectly. We don't need to recreate intentional communities because they don't work. Rather go to an existing small community where the infrastructure is there, everything is there, and just change the way the people think. So they start cooperate and collaborate, and everything changes, so much so that I no longer think that one small town can change the world, but one small town will change the world. And to finish here tonight, finally, I think, are we on time? 8 minutes over. I'm going to show you a little One Small Town video, and hopefully this will put you into a very positive frame of mind to finish off tonight. Hello, I'm Michael Tillinger, and I'm the founder of the Ubuntu Liberation Movement. Welcome to the launch of our new strategy and plan of action, which we call One Small Town Can Change the World. So, what is our plan? First, we find a small town of around 5,000 people who want to participate in their own makeover, their own salvation, their own rescue mission. Then we find consensus between the people, the mayor, and the council. We identify the special skills and talents of the people. We identify the industrial and environmental potential of the town. Then we develop a razor-sharp business plan for a variety of community projects to match these skills and individual potential. These projects are actually meticulously well-planned businesses, but there is one huge difference between these and other businesses. These belong to all the people of the town, together with the investors that made it possible. Everyone in our town who participates in the transformation will contribute 3 hours per week towards one of these new projects. This creates a powerful free labor force that no other corporation can compete with. Then comes a really critical part of our plan. We analyze how much our town needs to consume of everything we produce. And then we produce at least 3 times as much as we need. We can do this with ease because our cooperative labor force. Everything we produce is distributed freely to everyone who participates, and the other 2/3 are sold on the open market to our neighboring towns and cities, or even exported if need be. But herein lies the twist. We sell whatever we produce cheaper than any other supplier. How is this possible? Because of our free labor force and the ingredients that we supply ourselves. And so, in a strange twist of fate, money will become the tool that destroys capitalism. It becomes clear that contributionism devours capitalism wherever it may be. This will lead to a substantial income stream from all our projects very quickly. From food to technology, healthcare to music, tourism to engineering, and so much more that would not be possible in a capitalist model. Why? Because it would simply not be financially viable. Set your imagination free and imagine how much wealth our little town will create from just 50 new projects. But what do we do with all this money? We keep it simple, as we always should. 1/3 goes to the investors or the farmers or the factory owners that turn their businesses into a community project. 1/3 goes to upgrading and maintaining and constantly creating new projects based on the needs and skills of the people. And the last 1/3 is distributed equally to everyone who participates in the projects. This provides for an elegant and simple transition phase. No one has to leave their job because everyone has 3 hours a week. And very soon, the people of our town will be receiving more money from community projects than their jobs, while getting most of the things we need to live for free. As this abundance begins to grow and our town becomes wealthy beyond comprehension, new projects will start up every week, giving expression to the creative talents of our people. One by one, the people who work for the mines and other dangerous industries will leave their jobs because they earn more money and benefits from contributing only 3 hours per week. And without any resistance, opposition, or conflict, the nasty corporations will close because nobody will work there anymore. And the existing system will simply shut down and fade from our memory as we create a new system and a new social structure. At this point, we realize that we don't need money at all. And yet, we have more money now than we've ever had before. Everyone will know that money does nothing and people do everything. And so, in a strange twist of fate, we use the tools that enslave us to free us from that slavery and build an unshakable foundation in which the tools of enslavement have no more effect. There has never been a simpler way to unite the people and create abundance and prosperity for everyone. And there has never been a more lucrative investment opportunity to conscious millionaires to participate in creating a true utopian future for everyone. So, which will be the first small town to start the domino effect? Just one small town that'll change the world. why not yours? So I hope that gave you a quick insight into what we've been developing and evolving, what has been evolving over 12 years with the Ubuntu movement since 2005, and a simple philosophy. It's now evolved into something that many people around the world are embracing and thinking about and implementing on many levels. And I would like to thank you for coming and listening to some crazy guy from South Africa, spreading this weird information around the world. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you being here. And I'd like to ask you one thing before you go. Go out there and share this with everyone you know. Whatever resonates with you, let it wash over you, and then go out there and tell everybody. Because once they've heard it, they can never unhear it. Thank you for being here.